Hello and welcome back to my channel, Quirky What If. Today, we're kicking off the movie of, What If Deku Ran Away from UA. The author of this story is, Kim0ky4n from fanfiction.net. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. Ch1 Good night. Kurosaki-san. Hello. Kurosaki-san. Hanataro shouted through the doorway. He really hated coming all the way to Rukia's bedroom, but he had no choice. Some grumbling and shuffling around was heard for a few minutes, and finally Rukia answered the door. "What is it, Hanataro?" she asked groggily. Hanataro tried not to blush. The only thing covering her body was a thin robe that she failed to tie on properly. The front was opened and traveled well, pretty far down. "Yes, Hanataro?" Rukia asked, annoyed. "Oh right. Sorry. I have a message from Yukitake Taishu." She nodded for him to proceed. "He said he wanted to see you today around noon. He had a few matters to discuss with you about a mission." Hanataro said nervously. Rukia's clothing was really distracting him. "Why didn't he send someone from my squad?" she asked. "Well, I just happened to be in the area, so he asked me," he said, scratching the back of his neck and chuckling. She smiled and rolled her eyes. "He's just too lazy to find one of his own men to pass on the message," she muttered, smirking. "Thanks, Hanataro. I'll see you around, I guess," she said. He smiled at her and couldn't stop himself from glancing down one more time. After gulping nervously, he grinned and walked away. As she closed the door, Rukia finally realized why Hanataro was so nervous around her and quickly pulled her kimono closer to her body, blushing slightly. "What was that all about?" a voice from behind asked sleepily. "Just a message from Hanataro saying that my captain wants to chat with me later," she responded, sitting down next to her husband. "That's sort of weird that Hanataro sent it," Ichigo responded. "He said he was in the area and the captain told him what to do," she said, smiling. "Okay, well, let's go back to sleep," Ichigo said, pulling an arm around Rukia. She pushed it away. "It's 10:30 in the morning, Ichigo. So come on and get up," she said, pushing on Ichigo's bare shoulder. He sighed and turned flat on his back. "You really are annoying," he muttered. That comment earned him a slightly harder shove to his shoulder. Rukia stood up and started to change into her clothes. She noticed that Ichigo was being rather quiet. Curiously, she turned to look at him. He was still lying on his back with his arms pulled behind his head. He had the biggest smirk on his face. "What's so interesting?" she asked. He shrugged his shoulders. "Not much, just enjoying you changing your clothes in front of me." She rolled her eyes and pulled the rest of her clothes on. "Why did I have to marry such a pervert?" she asked. He chuckled. "My father is a pervert, not me," he said sarcastically. "Like father, like son," Rukia exclaimed. She picked up her kimono that was lying on the ground and threw it into the hamper. "Now really, Ichigo, get up," she demanded. He laid there for another minute or so and finally stood up. The only thing he was wearing were boxers. "Well, aren't you going to enjoy me changing?" he asked. Without glancing at him, she shrugged her shoulders. "There's not much to enjoy." She waited for him to walk over to her and say something else, but he never came. Rukia finally looked up at him and saw his clothes already on. "What, no interception?" she asked. He shrugged his shoulders mockingly. "I offered you enjoyment but you rejected it, sorry." She placed her hands on her hips. "Why should I enjoy it when I can get it any time?" she asked seductively. Ichigo was shocked by her words, but he stayed calm. "Not any time, Rukia," he threatened back daringly. She walked up to him slowly and placed her hands on his shoulders. "Oh really?" she whispered into his ear. He blushed slightly. Yes, after 7 years of being married to the little midget, he was blushing. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer to him. "Then try it," he whispered back. She giggled quietly and started to move her face to his. Just as she moved to close the small gap between their lips, there was another knock at the door. "Kurosaki Taishu." A boy yelled while banging on the door. Ichigo immediately removed himself from Rukia and opened the door. "What is it, Haru?" Ichigo asked his vice captain. Right, well," the boy tried to think. "Oh yes, now I remember. There's a captain's meeting at 3 today, so don't be late, and there's also a bunch of paperwork that needs to get done," the boy shouted. Ichigo rubbed the back of his head. "Alright, thanks for reminding me," Ichigo muttered as Haru turned around and left. Haru was a great vice-captain, but he could be really obnoxious sometimes. Rukia was chuckling behind him. "Looks like you have a great little vice-captain," she said. Ichigo sighed. "I really do forget about that stuff easily, so it's a good thing I have him to keep me in track, but honestly, he's more of a nagger than you, my own wife. Well, I better get going. I have some paperwork to do myself," Rukia said, glancing at the time. "We can't all be captains, you know. We can't all be vice-captains either," Ichigo said, grinning. Rukia kissed him on the lips and opened the door. "I guess I'll see you tonight then," she said, opening the door. Rukia started to walk out, but Ichigo grabbed her arm. "Ichigo?" she asked as she was spun around. Her lips immediately met his again, but this time he deepened the kiss. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, letting the moment last a bit longer than necessary. When he pulled away slightly, he smiled. "Yeah, I'll see you later," he said. Rukia kissed him one last time and finally strolled down the hallway. She couldn't stop the smile that curved on her lips. Rukia felt truly happy. "Ichigo," she whispered, chuckling to herself. Rukia decided to walk to her division instead of using Shuinpa, which she wasn't too great at anyways. The sun was out and there wasn't a cloud in the sky, so she decided to enjoy the moment. Her life had changed so drastically since the first moment she met Kurosaki Ichigo. She saved him, and then he saved her, again and again. Everybody knew the story. But what a lot of people in Soul Society didn't know about was how the two truly fell in love. After everything happened with Aizen, things quickly settled down in Soul Society. Rukia was asked pretty soon afterwards to become the vice-captain to the 13th squad, which she was surprised by. She gladly took the position and felt quite proud of herself. But because she had become vice-captain, she was always busy. Rukia could rarely go and visit Ichigo, which was pretty hard on the two. The longer Rukia was away, the more Ichigo missed her and thought about her. As Ichigo grew older and older, the distance that Rukia and Ichigo spent away from each other continued to increase. At one point, Rukia didn't see Ichigo for a year. When Ichigo turned 25, another terrorizing enemy struck Soul Society and the human world, causing Ichigo to have to once again fight. He hadn't fought much in the past years before that, so he was worried about the oncoming battle. But of course, he shocked everyone by somehow being even stronger than when he had fought Aizen. After Ichigo defeated the enemy and his 50 henchmen on his own, Soul Society finally decided to do something about Ichigo's immense powers. Ichigo was offered a position as the 3RD Division's captain just a year later. After training a bit more and taking several tests, Ichigo moved into Soul Society permanently and was given the honor of captain. Due to the many absences away from Rukia, he felt he couldn't stay away from her any longer. They both got to see one another much more than before. One thing led to another, and after 5 years of sneaking around, Ichigo finally proposed to the girl. Lucky for him, Byakuya agreed to the wedding. Byakuya said that the only reason he allowed the marriage was because Ichigo was now a captain and good enough for his baby sister to marry. So now, 7 years later, Ichigo and Rukia worked in Soul Society where they lived happily together. Of course it wasn't always happy and fun. They both had missions to go on and enemies to fight. Rukia sometimes stayed up late worrying about her husband who could sometimes get too big in the head, and Ichigo was, well, Ichigo. No matter what Rukia would do, he would always be overprotective of her. Rukia was much stronger now, not being capable of reaching Bankai anytime soon, but she had achieved several more abilities with her Zanpakuto and had completely mastered her older techniques. But Ichigo still had to once in a while travel with her to exterminate hollows, where he would always be the one to fend them off instead of Rukia. Sometimes they didn't see each other for months at a time. Ichigo had a division to run and Rukia was well aware of that. It sometimes made things better when they were apart from one another. Just like any married couple, especially with Ichigo and Rukia, they could sometimes get pretty into their fighting. Rukia would leave on a mission furious at her husband, but by the time the mission was done, she missed him and was of course no longer angry at him. Every time they were apart from one another, their love only grew somehow. Ichigo could sometimes get distracted at his division by thinking about her, and Rukia would end up getting yelled at by her captain because she wouldn't finish the needed paperwork due to her wandering thoughts. Ichigo and Rukia were quite good at the marriage thing nowadays. 7 years probably doesn't seem like that long of a time for the two, but in reality, it felt like a century. Ichigo now devoted his life to Soul Society, and he would be there for the rest of eternity. Sometimes he felt a little bit afraid knowing that Rukia was going to be his wife forever, but he knew he shouldn't think like that. We have to live not knowing what to expect, Ichigo. Rukia had said to him once a few years ago. We don't know what lies down the road, but if we are prepared, we can get through anything. Those words made Ichigo smile. He thought they were sort of corny at first, but she was right. Ichigo had changed so much. He still had a scowl on his face, but when the time was right, it would disappear. Ichigo was much more sensitive and mature than he used to be, especially with Rukia. They still argued like they used to when they first met, but they understood one another 100%. Rukia wouldn't have to say a word and Ichigo would immediately know that something was bothering her. Ichigo had always been a leader in a way, but he now controlled a segment of Soul Society, so somewhere in the years, he fully understood how to take charge. Ichigo still talked sarcastically to his comrades and officers, but he was no longer depressed like he had been when he was a teen, he was truly happy. Great, I guess I better go to the meeting. Ichigo mumbled. Flying out the window, Ichigo hastily made his way towards the meeting. Kurosaki-san. One of the younger Shinigami asked. How will we know if the hollow is around? Rukia smiled at her young comrades. You have to be able to sense it. Hollows have a sort of different ryatsu than Shinigami, so you just have to know what it is. The young Shinigami still looked confused. Well, how will we know though? Rukia looked out at the sky. I'll be taking you to the real world soon so that we can begin your training with hollows. Rukia, come here for a second. Her captain called with a grin set on his face. Yes, sir. She shouted. The meeting already finished? Rukia asked, confused. Yeah, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Yukite's face became serious. It seems there's another enemy hiding around in the human world. Your husband, Hitsugaya, and I were asked to go and investigate with a few other people. Rukia's eyes averted downwards. Ichigo had only been home for a week and he already had to leave on another mission. When do you leave? She asked sadly. Tomorrow morning. He responded. She sighed. Do you have any idea of how long this one will be? She asked. I don't know at this point. It could be a few days or it could be a few weeks. When we find out more about it I'll be sure to tell you. Yukite turned to look at the Shinigami training. They're getting better, Rukia, you're doing a great job training them. She let a small smile escape her lips. They've all been working hard. I told them we'll be going to fight some hollows soon. Yukite chuckled. They just don't get to see enough of hollow action when they are in school. You should probably wait until this problem clears before taking them for safety reasons. She nodded in agreement. That's what I was thinking. Alright, well, train with them for a few more hours, finish your paperwork, and go home. Yucatake said. He had a warm smile on his face. Out of all the captains, minus Ichigo, she really looked up to him. He was very considerate and caring. She nodded her head and walked back over to the Shinigami. Watch your footage. She yelled at one of the smaller girls. After finishing everything, she quickly returned home. Rukia figured Ichigo would still be with his division, but she hoped that he had gotten home early due to his oncoming mission. She walked into their mansion and headed up the stairs. She turned down the hallway and opened her bedroom door. The room was completely empty. Rukia tried to see if Ichigo's Ryatsu was anywhere nearby, but she couldn't pick it up. The sorrow Rukia felt inside was starting to release itself. She hated getting upset about Ichigo leaving, but she couldn't help it, he was going to be gone for who knows how long. Rukia hated acting like a worried wife. She changed into her yukata, feeling tired suddenly and collapsed onto her futon. Before Rukia fell asleep, a few tears flowed down her soft cheeks. She was sort of surprised by the strange wetness, for Rukia rarely cried. Don't let it bother you, Rukia. If I think about it too much then I'll be depressed the whole time. She whispered. Rukia, are you talking to yourself? Ichigo asked as he walked in the room. She quickly sat up and wiped the tears away from her eyes. If Ichigo saw her crying, he would be worrying about her the entire night. Unfortunately, the first thing he saw was Rukia's slightly red eyes and her attempt to wipe away her evidence. Letting the concern sink into his face, he crept down next to her. Hey, why are you crying? He asked softly. She shook her head and didn't look up at him. I'm not crying. She whispered. Ichigo caressed a hand across her cheek. Then how come your cheeks are wet? You better get to sleep pretty soon, Ichigo. You have to leave in the morning. She said, keeping her head down. It all made sense now. So, I'm guessing Yucatake already told you about it? He asked. She just nodded her head. I don't think I'll be gone for too long, so don't worry so much about it. She finally looked at him, another tear falling. You've only been back for a week, and you already have to leave on another mission. Ichigo sighed. Rukia, you know there's nothing I can do about that. I don't decide when I go on missions. I know. I don't know why I'm crying really. She chuckled, wiping a tear from her face. Ichigo knew why. His last mission had lasted for 3 months and only after a week of being home he now had to go on another one. It was hard to be away from Rukia for so long and then barely get a chance to actually be with her, but he had no choice. It's okay, Rukia. He whispered, wrapping his arm around her waist. He pulled her into his lap and leaned against the wall. We've hardly been around each other. I promise when I get back, I'll make it up to you. Rukia smiled warmly at her husband. It was rare that Ichigo was this sensitive towards her, and she absolutely loved it. She tightened her grip around his kimono and kissed his shoulder. He leaned his head down towards Rukia, his hair falling into his face slightly. Rukia, he whispered. She breathed in his scent and kissed his neck. He turned his head more so that Rukia was facing him. He brought his head forward more and latched his lips onto Rukia's. She wrapped her arms around his neck and placed her legs onto his. He pressed his hands onto her back and pushed her closer to him. This kiss quickly became intense and Rukia's hand ran through his hair. They somehow moved to the futon and Ichigo hovered over Rukia. He started to kiss her neck and she closed her eyes, enjoying his touch. Ichigo, Ichigo. She whispered with a hint of demand. He stopped abruptly and moved his head to her face. What is it? He asked breathlessly. She smiled at him. Let's just go to sleep. He was sort of surprised at first, but smiled back at her, kissing her one last time. Yeah, I'm pretty tired. Instead of climbing off of Rukia, He moved his head to her chest and moved his body to the side. He placed his hands around her small waist and closed his eyes. She ran her fingers through his hair and they stayed there silently, enjoying the company of the other. Because Ichigo left so often, Rukia told him not to say goodbye to her when he left, it just made it too hard. So she knew that he would be gone in the morning. She was pretty used to it after 7 years, but it could still be hard at times. Ichigo kissed her collarbone and lifted his head to face her. I guess this is good night then. I love you. He whispered. She grinned light. Good night, I love you too. He kissed her lightly on the lips and laid his head back down. She kept her left arm around his head and wrapped her other arm around his back. They both fell asleep, knowing that in the morning, they wouldn't see each other for a while. They weren't sure how long it would be, but they knew that the time apart was going to be difficult. Everything is working out exactly as I want to. A man wearing a cloak whispered to himself looking at an image of Ichigo and Rukia sleeping. Rukia, you'll be mine very soon. Ch2 just the beginning. Rukia fluttered her eyes open the next morning, feeling a bit colder than usual. She glanced to the right of her to see that she was alone. He's gone. She whispered. Deciding not to think much about it, she quickly got dressed. Lucky for me today is a busy day, she said, putting her clothes on. Rukia had a vice captain meeting that would last a few hours. She had to train some of the Shinigami in her division, and her brother wanted her to come by and visit. Rukia loved busy days like this because it could keep her mind off of her husband. Seeing that she had a little bit of free time before the meeting, she decided to go and chat with a friend of hers. Kurosaki-san. I'm so glad you came by. Hinamori called out. She hugged the smaller girl and let her inside. Well, sit down and we'll chat. Hinamori exclaimed. Rukia smiled and sat down. So Hinamori, how are you? Rukia asked. Hinamori shrugged her shoulders. Things are all right at the moment. Toshiro had to leave on his mission this morning, so I'm a little sad about that. Rukia nodded. Yeah, Ichigo left too. Hinamori looked confused. Oh, I didn't know your husband was going on the mission. He's only been back for a week, right? Yep, just a week ago. But it's okay, there's nothing we can really do about it anyways. Hinamori nodded in agreement. So when is the wedding? Rukia asked. To this statement, Hinamori perked up. Well, Toshiro and I aren't really sure yet because we don't know when he has to leave on missions, but I'd say in the next few months. Hinamori said, smiling sadly. Rukia rolled her eyes. That's what you said last month. Hitsugaya had really grown up in the past 17 years. He was no longer the short boy that everyone knew and made fun of. He reached several inches taller than Ichigo, making his looks even more handsome than before. Hinamori laughed nervously. It's just hard to find the time, your husband isn't the only one gone a lot. Rukia laughed too, but with a hint of sadness. Come to think of it, if my brother hadn't been the one to set up the marriage then we probably would have waited a long time too. Rukia said. I don't mind waiting. I know we'll eventually get married. Hinamori mumbled, blushing slightly. Well, we better get going to the meeting. Rukia said, standing up. Hinamori followed and they made their way to the meeting. When they arrived, all of the vice captains were there. There were new faces and old faces. One person Rukia recognized was Ichigo's vice captain Haru. She smiled at him and made her way to Matsumoto. Oi! Rukia! Matsumoto cried, patting the girl's back. I haven't seen you in a while, how are you? Rukia only sighed. Things are okay at the moment. Alright everyone, let's start the meeting. Izuru Kira said, standing up in front of everyone. The meeting was pretty standard. A few new rules were set for everyone and talks about previous missions were spoken of. Alright Kurosaki, please give us your report. Rukia stood up from her seat and looked at everyone around her. The division is doing pretty well for this time of year. The new Shinigami are training and moving at a pace faster and greater than those of previous years. The only problem I am seeing is it seems the new Shinigami don't understand enough about hollows. I don't know if we can do anything about this, but when we were younger, we knew a great deal about hollows before entering into a division. If we could maybe do or say something about this, I would greatly appreciate it. That is all from the 13th division. With that said, Rukia sat back down. Matsumoto stood up. I am having the same problem in my division. The new Shinigami don't know enough about the hollows. I took them to the real world a few days ago and they were scared out of their minds. Don't they see hollows while training at the academy? She asked. Izuru stood up. I'll tell my captain, Yamamoto Taishu, about these problems. Everyone nodded in agreement and the meeting continued. Once the meeting was finished, all of the vice captains left the building and departed into their different ways. Rukia had become good friends with Hinamori and Matsumoto. Well, since my captain's gone, I have to run the division. Matsumoto complained, scratching her head. Same here. Rukia replied. I hate paperwork. Matsumoto shouted. I guess I better go then, I'll talk to you guys later. She yelled and disappeared. I better go too. Sentaro and Kion are probably fighting. Rukia said, sighing. Hinamori giggled. Yes, Abarai Taishu probably wants me to get back too. They both waved at each other and went their separate ways. When Rukia arrived at her division, she was surprised to see that everything was actually under control. The newer Shinigami were sparring with one another, and all of the others were working on whatever needed to get done. Kurosaki Fukutechu. A man yelled as he approached her. Yes, what is it? She asked. He handed her a note. Instruction from Yukitake Taishu. She took the note from his hand. Thank you. She said. The man bowed and walked away. She immediately rolled her eyes and sighed as the first thing on the note mentioned, lots of paperwork. Honestly, why did so much paperwork need to get done? The rest of the note talked about what the seated officers and everyone else in the division needed to do. She folded the note and stuck it in her free pocket. First things first, training. One thing Rukia enjoyed doing was teaching the younger Shinigami. It amazed her at how fast they learned. They sort of reminded her of herself when she first joined the division. She even allowed them to call her Kurosaki-san to make them feel more comfortable, while the rest of the division had to call her by her proper name. Rukia wanted them to have someone to look up to, just like her old vice captain had done for her. Even though she worked them pretty hard, she always gave them breaks, where she would try to talk to them all and get to know them. They were all shy at first, but they were slowly warming up to the short woman. After hours of training, Rukia allowed them to leave and she went to check on the rest of her squad. Sentaro, Kion, what are you two doing? She asked as she walked into their small little office. They were fighting about something. She always thought that in the many years they worked in this division that they would stop their silly antics, but they were exactly the same, except a little older now. Oh. Sorry, Kurosaki Fukutechu. They shouted in unison. We were just filing these papers Yukitake Taishu requested. Rukia folded her arms and nodded. Good, try to finish it by tonight, okay? They nodded and she left the room. Rukia felt proud of herself, like she really was the actual captain of the division. Maybe I'll be captain in 100 years. She thought to herself. If she wanted to be captain, then she needed to achieve Bankai, which wouldn't be for a long time. Her thoughts wandered to her idiot husband, who had in just 3 mere days achieved Bankai. She shook her head, not wanting to get distracted at the moment. Rukia had done a pretty good job of keeping him off her mind, and she wanted it to continue that way. She finally retired to the office where she had double the paperwork to do. Great, I hope Enai-sama won't be angry that I'll be coming by late. She muttered. The harsh work of doing paperwork began. She signed her signature at least 100 times and had to stack papers into the right files. After 3 hours of doing the loathsome work, she left her division. Well, it's only 8 o'clock, not too late. She thought to herself as she walked up to the Kichiki mansion. Byakuya always visited with Rukia at least once a month to see how she was doing. Over the years Byakuya had been kinder to her. He would always have his cold and emotionless stare, but the fact that he took time out of his very busy schedule to talk to her was a big deal. "Kuchiki-sama, your sister is here." A servant called. A moment later, Rukia entered the room. Byakuya was sitting on a small couch. In front of him was a tea kettle and 2 cups. In all honesty, Byakuya reserved that room for special visits from guests like Rukia. "Enai-sama, sorry I'm so late." She apologized, taking a seat across from him. A servant poured some tea into both cups. "It's fine. You must be busy with your captain being gone." He replied back emotionlessly. Rukia smiled lightly and took a small sip from her tea. She really didn't like tea all that much, but she felt it would be rude to not accept the drink from her brother's generosity. "How are you?" he asked, looking directly at her. She looked away, not being able to handle his intense stare. "I'm fine. I'm just trying to get all the work that needs to be done within the division. It's a little more stressful with the captain being gone." Rukia responded. She hated complaining to her brother, but she didn't know what else to say. "I see. Yes, it can be stressful at times, but it will pay off," Byakuya said, sipping on his tea lightly. "How is Kurosaki?" Byakuya managed to spit out. He did care for Ichigo, but he would still always grow with irritation by the fact that on several occasions, Ichigo had fought Byakuya and beaten him every single time. "He's on another mission. There's been some sort of attack in the human world, but you know all about it," Rukia said. Of course Byakuya would know, even if he wasn't a captain he would probably somehow find out. "Yes, I know about it. I'm sure Kurosaki will handle himself just fine," Byakuya muttered. "I know he'll be alright, but I can't help but worry," Rukia responded and put her cup down. "Well, I wish I could visit more, but I should probably head back home. Tomorrow is another busy day and I have to get up early," Rukia said, rising to her feet. Byakuya stood along with her and walked her to the door. "Please be careful, Rukia," Byakuya said with an almost caring hint in his voice. Rukia smiled. "Don't worry, Enai-sama, I'll be fine." She waved goodbye to him and left the Kichiki mansion. The visits with him always lasted that short amount of time, but enough to satisfy Byakuya. He was after all a man of few words. Rukia then remembered why she hated visiting her brother at night. She thought that he would surely make Rukia and Ichigo live in the mansion or close by his home, but she instead was given a large home very far away. Deciding to practice her horrible shunpa, she started to make her way to her house. Embarrassed at how slow her movement still seemed, she felt thankful that no one stood outside to see her. She wouldn't even allow Ichigo to see her shunpa skills. Ichigo didn't even know that she had been training. Rukia shook her head for the millionth time that day so that she wouldn't think of Ichigo. Rukia made the mistake of hitting a loose board on a building and started falling to the ground. Lucky for her, she turned her body so that she hit the ground feet and hands first. Right after she landed onto the cold dirt floor, she slowly stood up and brushed the dirt off of her clothes. Checking for scratches, she decided to walk for the rest of the way. "I'm halfway, I can do this," Rukia thought to herself, feeling a little silly about being afraid. She laughed at herself as she strolled down the dark alleyways of Siriidii. Rukia then heard footsteps coming from behind and stopped dead in her tracks. She listened for a long time, and after not hearing anything she continued to walk home. The footsteps continued once again and she paused, only to hear silence. She looked around and tried to sense another Ryatsu, but felt nothing. Come on Rukia, get a hold of yourself. She thought. Just as she turned a corner, a black object jumped in front of her and leaped towards her. Rukia jumped out of the way and reached for her sword, but whatever attacked moved with great speed and stopped her before she could attack. The black blob ran into her, knocking her to the ground. She could now see that this blob was a person wearing a black cloak. Rukia tried kicking the person off but her body wouldn't move under the person's grasp. She went to scream but something covered her mouth and everything went black. Rukia slowly opened her eyes, but she couldn't see anything around her. She tried to move her hand but it wouldn't budge. Voices could be heard all around her. The only thing Rukia could make out clearly was someone saying her name. She's awake. A voice hissed. Rukia tried to lift her head to see if that would help, but it wouldn't move either. Footsteps now approached Rukia and she felt a bit afraid. Something touched her head and before she knew it, Rukia could see everything. A person wearing a black cloak covering their face held what looked like a bandana. Sorry Rukia, we weren't sure when you would wake up, so we kept you blindfolded. The person said. The voice snarled and pierced through Rukia's ears. How did they know her name? She went to say something, but instead went into a coughing fit. Oh dear Rukia, please take it easy. The person said. He walked over to her and sat her up against the wall. Rukia realized that no shackles or knots kept her tied down. Am I paralyzed? She thought. She looked around the room. On one side of the dark room sat a bed next to a nightstand. The walls were dark brown and the room only gloomed with more darkness due to all windows being absent. After coughing one last time, Rukia found her voice. Where am I? She demanded. Another person in a dark cloak walked up next to the first person, a deck of cards in his hand. They both laughed. Rukia, now why would we tell you something like that? The second person asked. Tell me. She tried to shout. They still wouldn't answer to her. The only parts of their faces that Rukia could see were their smirking lips. Her body still wouldn't move. Why can't I move? She asked. They laughed again and still didn't say anything. It was safe to say that Rukia was now furious. We have a proposition for you Rukia. The first person said crouching low next to her. Rukia assumed the two to be men due to their deep voices. We've been watching you for quite some time now. The second one said, walking back and forth across the room. He kept shuffling the deck of cards in his hands. And we have a great interest in you. Rukia only let them continue to speak, trying to figure out some way to escape or move her body. She averted her eyes to see that her sword was gone. You have something, well a lot of something that we want. Fear began to sink into her mind. Ichigo's face popped into her head and she couldn't control what slipped out of her mouth. What do you want with Ichigo? She hissed, staring at the two ferociously. The man in front of her turned and looked at the man pacing around the room with the deck or cards who looked back at him. They both laughed even more hysterically than before. Oh Rukia, you really are amusing. The man in front of her said, placing a hand on her leg and scooting closer to her. Rukia tried to move away but couldn't due to her body not being able to move. This does in a way have to do with your husband, but he's not the main focus here. Rukia didn't understand. Then what do you want? She asked, having the ability to now move her head. Was whatever spell that was paralyzing her body wearing off? The two men only chuckled now. As we stated earlier, you have something that we want Rukia. She tried to think of everything possible thing that they would want and she could think of nothing. Though of course, Rukia once had the Hogyoku in her body, and she hadn't been aware of it until it was finally taken out. Then what is it? Rukia snapped back, trying to move any other part of her body. To her luck, her fingers started wiggling. The man with the deck of cards now stood next to Rukia as well. The answer is simple Rukia. He whispered moving closer to her face. Once he was next to her ear, he whispered. Your body. Ch3 The deck of cards. Once he was next to her, he whispered. Your body. Rukia's eyes widened. My body. She stuttered out, not really sure of what they meant. The man scooted away from her face and looked at the man next to him. Why don't you tell her brother? He said. The other man nodded. Right, this is sort of hard to explain, so bear with me. Rukia could now move both of her hands. Well, Rukia, to begin, we have been watching you since you were a small child, a baby even. She didn't want to listen to what they had to say, she just wanted to get out of there. As you grew older, my brother and I here took a fascination to you. I mean, think about it. You grew up in Rukongai and then you were accepted into the Soul Society Academy. Without even graduating you were placed into a division and adopted into the Kachiki family. You went through the traumatizing experience of killing your own vice captain. Rukia winced at that comment, but the man continued. You met the boy Kurosaki Ichigo and gave him your powers so he could save his family. You were taken to Soul Society where you were to be executed but were saved by Ichigo. You fought alongside with Ichigo against Aizen and then became the vice captain of 13th Division. And last but not least, you married Kurosaki Ichigo 5 years after he became a captain. Rukia was terrified. How did they know so much about her? What point are you getting at? She muttered angrily. Why don't you take it from here, brother? The first man said. All right, sure. He looked at Rukia and began to speak. Well, fascination grew into obsession, until we decided you could no longer be ignored. Rukia's eyes widened at this. What do you want with me then? She asked shakily, feeling the movement of her toes. The two no longer had smirks on their faces, but serious looks. We hate to do this to you, Rukia, to hurt you, but we can't get satisfied unless you do as we say. Rukia looked at them threateningly. Why would I ever listen to what you want me to do? She asked viciously. The smirk once again returned to their faces. If you don't listen to what we want you to do, then there will be great consequences. Fear illuminated from her body, and she could sense it. Something in her gut told her to get out of there and fast, but what could she do? What do you mean by consequences? She asked bravely. The second man took a card from the card deck in his hands and placed it in front of Rukia. Tell me who that is on the card. He asked. Rukia's eyes widened. Ichigo, she whispered. In the picture, Ichigo looked to be running. This is Ichigo currently in the human world looking for the so-called attacker. I'm not stupid, you know, you could have just drawn this or something. Rukia snapped back. The two men smiled and pulled out a strange-looking ball. With this glass ball we can see whatever we want. The first man said. He placed his grimy hands along the smoothness of the sphere and closed his eyes. A blurry video type of thing glowed from the sphere, showing Ichigo, Hitsugaya, and her captain all running. You see? The man said. Rukia looked away. The second man pulled the card away and placed it in his deck. So you think we are lying? The man asked next to the glass ball. He smirked and placed his hands on the ball again, closing his eyes. An image came up of Ichigo and Rukia lying asleep on their futon. The only means of coverage was their blanket. Rukia scanned the ball thoroughly, and when she realized the display before her, she once again looked away, embarrassed. Now please, tell me that this didn't happen. The second man with the card spoke. You see, Rukia, we can look into the past and present, but not the future. That is how we know so much about you, Rukia. We can see you through this ball and know what's going on. And as for the attacks in the human world, let's just say we had something to do with that. Rukia decided to keep her mouth shut and let them continue to talk. With these cards in my hand, I can find any person I want to in the world. He pulled up a card with a picture of Rukia, sitting with her eyes wide in shock against the wall. See? This is you right now. He pulled up another card of her brother, sitting in his office sipping on tea. This is your brother in his studies. He mixed the cards around and pulled up a card of a man Rukia didn't recognize. This is a man from the human world sleeping. The man said. The other man with the glass ball closed his eyes again. Before them was a picture of the man on the card and his wife sleeping on the ball. Let's say I was to accidentally rip the card to shreds. The man said, tearing the thin paper from limb to limb. Rukia's eyes widened in horror as the man on the crystal ball started screaming in agony and pain. The wife woke up and tried to stop him from shaking. What's wrong? She cried. A few seconds later, the man stopped moving. The woman pressed her thumb to his neck and started crying. She picked up the phone and dialed a number. Yes, emergency, I think my husband is dead. She cried. Rukia couldn't believe the horror she had just witnessed. Did you? She asked. Yes, I just killed the man by ripping this card up. You see, these cards work as lifelines to anyone we wish to show up onto the cards. Instead of the man speaking, Rukia finished for him. So you killed innocent people in the human world to make it look like some sort of attack or enemy, hoping that Ichigo would for some reason be called to investigate. Rukia choked out. Both of the men smiled viciously. Precisely, Rukia, with just a pinch of extra ryatsu around the dead bodies, it would seem like someone other than a human attacked them. Besides, how else would we be able to speak with you with your husband snooping around? Rukia was way beyond furious at this point. Now, as we both stated earlier, if you don't do as we say there will be consequences. The man pulled out a card with Ichigo again. Rukia wanted to pull the card out of his hand, but her arms still wouldn't move. If you don't obey us, then I could kill your husband right now by merely ripping the card up. Rukia didn't know what to say. She could never allow something like that to happen to Ichigo. What do you want from me exactly? She whispered in a low voice. The first man walked back over to her. We already told you, my dear, your body. Rukia now understood what they wanted. They didn't want some strange object or anything that Rukia had hidden somewhere, they wanted her. So, if you kill me then you'll leave Ichigo alone? She asked. Rukia couldn't believe what she was saying. This caused them to laugh once again. Rukia, I was beginning to think you were a pretty bright young girl, but it seems you aren't as smart as you appear. Didn't we say earlier that we were only going to hurt you? She waited for them to continue. We are simply obsessed with you. From watching you every night and seeing the delight play across his face when you are with your husband. We simply want to feel what your husband feels each time. Each time. Rukia thought. She immediately felt entirely sick to her stomach. She knew exactly what they wanted. They lusted for her, for Rukia, and if she didn't let them do as they pleased, they could possibly kill her husband and anyone else she cared for. Before she knew it, the man that had been holding the ball picked her up and lifted her onto the bed. She screamed as loudly as she could, trying to somehow fight her way from the two disgusting men. Once she was down on the bed, she continued to scream. Her legs and hands were now wobbling. Now the man saw this and closed his eyes and pressed a hand next to her heart. Bind her. He chanted. A sort of electric shock passed through her body, paralyzing her once again. But she still had her voice and continued to yell. Just let me go. Why do you want me? She screamed. They only ignored her. The man with the card sat next to her and placed the card with Ichigo on it in front of her face. The second man grabbed the glass ball and showed an image of Ichigo now sitting on a building resting. She could hear him talking to Hitsugaya. Rukia only stared at Ichigo, wanting him to come to her. If you don't do as we say, we'll kill him. The man sitting on the bed said. She looked at him angrily. So you want to test us? He ripped a small piece of the corner off the card. There was immediately a hissing sound coming from Ichigo in the glass ball. Rukia averted her eyes to Ichigo to see him grabbing his shoulder in pain. Tears leaked out of her eyes. What's wrong, Ichigo? Yukitake asked. I'm not sure, my shoulder all of the sudden started to hurt. Why don't we rip it a little more? The man asked. No. Rukia screamed. He stopped what he was doing and looked at her. Please, just please don't hurt him. She cried. Rukia hated herself at the moment, but she wasn't going to let Ichigo get hurt from something that was happening to her. Good girl Rukia. He hissed and put the deck of cards down. The other man set the glass ball down and walked to the other side of the bed. Their eyes roamed all over Rukia's body. They placed tape over her mouth and she screamed as loudly as she could. Just do as we say and this will all be over with soon. Rukia closed her eyes and tried to think of Ichigo as the men began to undo her clothing. Rukia felt so weak. How did she get herself into this situation? She didn't want to risk Ichigo getting hurt over her, so she had no choice but to let them do as they pleased. Though she really didn't do anything. She just had to lay there and feel the pains and touches. The smirks and pinches. Their sickening mess of desire. Rukia could do nothing. A few hours later, they undid the spell holding her body down and blindfolded her once again. One of the men picked up Rukia and dashed out of the building. They stopped just a block away from her home, untied the bandana, and handed her a note. This will give you further instruction Rukia and remember, we'll be watching you to make sure you don't say anything to anyone. If you do, your husband will die. She just stared blankly as the man vanished, keeping the note in her hand. Since her body was no longer paralyzed, she could feel every pain. Rukia slowly walked home, not being able to move too much due to her stiff legs. There were bruises all over her body except for her neck and face. She had to act calm when she came home, she couldn't let anyone suspect anything. Otherwise, her husband would die. As she finally reached the mansion and stumbled to her room, she realized that it was midnight. She quickly ripped her clothes off and changed, feeling disgusting all over. Rukia fell to her futon and finally let her tears fall. She sobbed for hours and hours, crying out Ichigo's name. But he wouldn't come, he was trying to find an enemy that didn't exist out there. She couldn't think. She could only cry and curl up into a tiny ball. Rukia felt so helpless but there was nothing she would be able to do. How would she face Ichigo when he came back? It was as if she betrayed him or cheated on him in a way, but she had to go through the pain to keep him alive. Rukia couldn't have stopped the men anyways for her body had been paralyzed. What sickened her more was the fact that the men were probably watching her right now, watching as she cried hopelessly. They were probably laughing and feeling joy, for they got what they wanted. Rukia hated knowing the fact that they got the satisfaction. They had won. But there was absolutely nothing she would be able to do. Rukia soon fell asleep from the exhaustion on her body, tears still cascading down her cheeks. She woke up much later than usual the next morning, hoping that the previous events had just been a horrible nightmare. She sat up and immediately saw the white parchment of paper sitting by her bed that the two men had given her. She was to read it and follow the instructions. Rukia slowly opened up the paper and read the contents. Dear Rukia, we are so glad that you made the right choice to give into what we wanted. This is how everything will work. We will continue to make sure that Ichigo leaves on missions to the human world, and when he is gone, you will meet us every night at 10 o'clock or until you finish your work at the place where we released you. Remember, we will be watching you. If you do not show up, then you know what will happen. Love. You know who. Rukia crumbled the letter and threw it across the floor. She wanted to cry again but there were no tears left to come out. Rukia had a lot of work to do and she was already late. How can I get through the day? How can I stop this? Rukia thought to herself as she got dressed. Realizing they were probably watching her, she covered herself up the entire time. She took a deep breath and stepped outside of her room. Rukia had to hide any evidence of what was going on. She had to act completely normal. She couldn't let anyone suspect a thing. So how would she be able to hide this from her husband when he came home? Ichigo always knew when something was bothering her, and she would really be tempted to tell him, but if she did, Ichigo could very well die. Even if the two brothers were bluffing the whole time, which she saw as quite impossible, she didn't even want to risk or think of the idea of Ichigo being killed because of her. Ch4 fighting the pains. The walk to her division took twice as long to get to. Rukia dreaded seeing her comrades. She had just been through something traumatizing, so how would she be able to handle other people? Rukia was a tough woman and could deal with many things. But getting raped? Being molested and touched? She wasn't sure if that was something she could deal with. What made everything even worse was she couldn't say anything about it. Were those two men only lusting for her? Was that really the only reason they went to such lengths to get her? When she reached her division, she took a deep breath and stepped inside. Rukia was very late to the division that day, for it was already lunchtime. "Kurosaki-san. Are you okay?" one of the younger Shinigami Hatsuka asked. Rukia tensed up. Was she really that obvious? "Why do you ask?" Rukia said while forcing a smile out. "Well, you usually never come in this late, so I was just wondering if you were sick or something." Rukia felt relieved that the girl was only worried about why she had been so late. "Yes, I think had a bit of a cold this morning. Sorry to worry you." Rukia replied and walked over to get some food. Strangely enough, Rukia wasn't too hungry. "Kurosaki fukutechu." A man called from yesterday. The sound of the man yelling made Rukia flinch, bringing back memories of the previous night. She squeezed her eyes closed and looked away from the man. "What is it?" she asked. "News from Yucatec Taishu." He handed Rukia another note. "Thank you," she replied. The man bowed like the day before and left Rukia to herself. She read through the contents of the letter and froze when the words, "Ichigo had some sort of strange pain in his shoulder," were written. Tears threatened to spill, but Rukia held them in. The note read that they would be coming back in a week if they still couldn't find any clues on the enemy. Rukia felt anger boil up inside. She knew who was behind it, and she felt sick to her stomach to know that innocent people were being killed because two men wanted her. They wanted Rukia. She tossed the paper in the trash and took a seat. There was still a good 15 minutes left on their lunch break, so she decided to take a short nap. Nightmares raced through her mind of what the men did to her, and she could hear someone yelling out her name. "Kurosaki-san. Kurosaki-san." A young Shinigami shouted. Rukia snapped, her eyes opened, realizing where she was. "Are you alright?" "You were shouting and grunting," the girl asked. Rukia laughed nervously. "Everything is just fine. Is lunch over?" she asked. All the Shinigami nodded their heads. "Okay, well, let's begin our training. Grab a partner and we will begin with sparring," Rukia shouted. Her body still ached, but she ignored the pains. Once everyone had a partner, they began their fighting. "Hatsuka-san, don't let your guard down. Jean, bring your sword out just a little further, there you go," Rukia shouted out. A sharp pain surged down her body and she closed her eyes tightly. Luckily for her, no one noticed her and continued to train. Just as Rukia stood back up, a girl asked her a question. "So we are going to fight Hollow soon?" the girl asked. Rukia nodded, continuing to watch the others. "Yes, I don't know when, but we will as soon as possible." The entire day, Rukia fought the urge to shout in agony. The area between her legs was now beginning to sore with pain. She was going to pass out and soon. The exhaustion on her body was literally making her weak. "Kurosaki-san, are you alright?" a young Shinigami asked. Rukia glanced at the girl and began to fall. Sentaro and Kion saw the whole incident, Rukia collapsing onto the ground and the entire Shinigami gathering around her. Rukia sat up. Everyone stared at their vice-captain with fear. "I'm fine, really," she said, smiling. "Why don't you go lay down for a little while?" Sentaro said. Rukia didn't feel like arguing with him. She needed to sleep, but she couldn't let people get any sort of hint. Sentaro and Kion walked next to Rukia to make sure she didn't collapse again. Kurosaki Taishu, are you going to be okay? Kion asked. Rukia smiled lightly. I think I'm just a little tired. I had a bit of a cold this morning. They both nodded and left the room so that Rukia could rest. She fell onto the futon and looked at the ceiling. If Ichigo finds out that I've fainted during a mere practice, then he'll get suspicious. Rukia said to herself. She placed a hand to her stomach as it growled. I probably should have eaten something, that's probably why I fainted. But Rukia knew it was more than just not eating. She really didn't know what sort of side effects came with being raped, but she knew that mentally, she was probably unstable. Why am I not freaking out? I've heard of girls getting raped and they shut themselves out from the world. If one man looks at them they scream and cry. Why am I not reacting in that sort of way? She thought to herself. Perhaps what had happened just hadn't hit her yet. Her mind wouldn't register what had occurred. She thought back to the note they had given her. You will meet us every night at 10 o'clock, the note had said. Rukia shuddered knowing that nothing was close to being done. It was one thing to have to go through the experience once, but she had to go through it all over again every night. Rukia could never get used to this sort of thing. How did they expect her to not say anything to anyone? Someone would eventually realize that something was terribly wrong with her and she wouldn't be able to hide the secret. Ichigo would want to have SEC with her, and wouldn't he be able to see the bruises? Her heart sank. The thought of another man touching her, even her own husband at that moment, caused tears to stream down her cheeks. Could she let Ichigo touch her in such a way after what had just happened? It would be very odd if Rukia all of a sudden didn't want to do that with him, for they were pretty active with that sort of thing. But what would be worse? What if they started to do that and Rukia froze up and pushed him away? Rukia could never live with herself if she hurt him like that, reject him in a way. More tears poured down her cheeks. She turned to her side in the case that if someone walked in they wouldn't see her crying. Rukia knew she wouldn't be able to keep it from Ichigo for very long, but she didn't want him getting hurt because of her. Rukia slammed a fist down onto the ground. She didn't even know who these men were. They never said their names or anything, just that they had been watching her grow up. Now Rukia knew there were sadly people out there that were literally as insane as the two men, but was there maybe a reason behind their wickedness? Why did they want her to suffer so badly? Most enemies that hate a person simply kill that person, but these men simply want her to suffer for their own sick desires. Rukia wanted to sleep, but she knew if she did that she would only have nightmares. If I don't sleep then I will faint again, she whispered to herself. Rukia fell asleep for a good hour and finally woke up when she heard voices in the hallway. There was an instant flashback of when Rukia had first woken up in the room she was being held captive. She's awake. A voice called. Rukia placed her hands over her ears and closed her eyes. Kurosaki Taishu? A female voice asked. Rukia put her hands down and smiled, glad to see that it was a woman. So you think you have a cold? Kion asked. Rukia nodded. Yeah, I had some trouble sleeping last night due to my coughing, and so I guess I just used a little bit too much energy today. Kion looked at her suspiciously, but then smiled. Well look, if would want to you can go home and rest. Sentaro and I can finish the paperwork. Rukia went to argue back, but Kion put her hands up. Hey, we went a while without having a vice captain, so we're pretty much experts. Rukia smiled warmly. A thought of Kion popped into her head and she chuckled. Are you sure? Rukia asked. Kion smiled. Of course. Don't worry about it. Rukia smiled, thanked the girl, and walked out of the small room. As Rukia left the division, a few of her subordinates approached. Kurosaki-san, are you okay? The girl Hatsuka asked from earlier. Yeah, I just need to rest a little bit more. I couldn't sleep last night due to my constant coughing. Rukia hated lying so much and acting so casual about this, but it was the only thing she had. Oh, okay. Are you sure? The girl asked again. Rukia stopped and looked at her. Why are you so curious? Rukia asked. The girl looked afraid. I'm sorry, and I know it's none of my business, but I saw a pretty nasty bruise on your arm when you fell, and I was just wondering if everything was okay. Rukia was truly shocked. She quickly smiled. Oh, this? She said, pulling up her sleeve to reveal the bruise. I was on my way home when I slipped on a loose board on the roof. I fell and landed on my arms, that's where the bruise came from. This seemed to convince the smaller girl, and she laughed. And I thought I was clumsy. The girl exclaimed. Rukia chuckled along with her and finally walked away. She wished with all her might that she had received the bruise from falling, but she knew it wasn't the real truth. The two men had latched their hands around her arms so they could get a better feel, leaving the bruise on her arm. She brought her arms around her shoulders as wind blew by. Rukia could now see that hiding this was going to be much harder than she had ever imagined. The more she talked to people, the more she was reminded of what they did to her. As she reached her home, she decided to go to the hot springs nearby to let her muscles relax. If you tell anyone about this, we'll know, and your husband will die. They had said to her. They were watching her every move, which meant they would more than likely watch as she entered the hot spring. On her way to the hot spring, she grabbed 2 robes and towel and made her way to the hot spring. They won't be able to see me once I'm in the water. It's too dark. When she reached the hot spring, she quickly changed into her robe and slipped into the water. After her body was fully inside, she took the wet robe off and set it next to the dry one. She closed her eyes and let the heated water work its magic on her bruised and knotted skin. Rukia leaned against some rocks so that her back could relax. To block out images of the two men, Rukia thought about Ichigo. She thought about all the times they were alone together and how wonderful he made her feel. Ichigo loved her with all of his heart, just like how she loved him. Their relationship had been a slow one, but they were together now and they always would be. Rukia didn't know how she was going to do it, but she was going to stop those two men from what they were doing. Why should she let 2 selfish men get what they want? Rukia and Ichigo were happy and these 2 men were ruining it. She knew it might be hard, but she was smart. Rukia was quite good at figuring and solving problems, so maybe if she learned more about these 2 men, she could put an end to their sick ways. After 30 minutes of soaking in the hot waters, Rukia slipped her dry robe on in the water and stepped out. By the time she made it home it was only 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Maybe I should go back now that I feel better. Rukia thought. But her eyes were still fighting to stay opened, so she decided she would sleep for several hours. Another shudder surged through her body. At 10 o'clock she had to meet them in the spot where they released her. She barely remembered where it was at due to the fact that she was so dazed. Rukia set an alarm on her phone to wake her up at 9 o'clock and she fell asleep. The whole time Rukia was tormented with nightmares of the 2 men. She tossed and turned in her sleep, miming out Ichigo's name occasionally. One time she even dreamt that Ichigo did save her, but then one of the men got a hold of a card and ripped the one with Ichigo on it, causing Ichigo to die. No! She screamed, sitting up in her futon. Her alarm on her phone was going off. She looked at the time. 9:45. Why didn't I wake up any sooner? Rukia cried and stood up. She quickly changed, ignoring the fact that they could be watching her, and dashed out of the room. She tried to remember where the man had released her and began to panic. If she couldn't remember how to get there and not make it on time, then Ichigo would possibly die. Rukia thought really hard and finally a few street names came to her head. Ignoring the pains in her legs and arms, she ran to the spot, hoping she would make it there on time. As she approached, she saw a shadow of a person in the corner. Rukia hoped that someone would be outside to see Rukia with the strange man, but there wasn't a single person outside. She walked closer to the man and saw his smirk. 3, 2, wow Rukia, I honestly didn't think you would make it. He said, pulling the sleeve of his shirt down as he finished looking at his watch. Rukia winced at hearing his voice. It was so smooth, almost like it wasn't real, but yet it was deep at the same time. Come on then. He said, pointing his finger to come closer. Rukia followed him into a smaller room and he tied the bandana over her face. This is how it will always be Rukia. He whispered into her ear. After shaking from the deep chills, the man placed his hand on her back. Bind her. He demanded. The electric shock was again surged through her body and she began to fall. She waited to hit the ground but was instead caught by 2 arms. Well then, let's go. He said chuckling and began to move. Rukia had no idea where he was taking her, but she dreaded every moment. After about 10 minutes of being blindfolded, she sat down onto what felt like a bed and the bandana was taken off of her face. We are quite proud of you Rukia. We watched you all day today and you did a wonderful job at lying. I think you will do fine. She only watched the two in horror. Oh, and we decided to go ahead and tell you our names. My name is Hiraku, and this is my brother, Ryu. She of course wouldn't be able to tell which was which because of the identical cloak they always wore, and as far as their names went, they were probably just making them up. Hiraku, the one that had properly introduced the two, walked over and leaned down close to Rukia. You do smell good. He whispered seductively. She closed her eyes as he caressed her cheek with his nose. I told you Raya that she would smell fresh. She did go to the hot springs today. Hiraku said, smiling. Though Rukia could never call that a smile. Monsters didn't smile after all. Well then, let's get to business shall we? Ryu said, walking to her other side. They once again covered her mouth with tape. We really hate placing tape over your mouth, for we do wish to kiss those luscious lips, but for now we will just have to wait. For some reason, knowing that their lips would possibly touch hers made her more afraid than ever before. With their last comment said, they devoured her, not letting her rest for a second. She closed her eyes and tried to not think about what they were doing, but this time it was much harder to do, and it would only continue to get more difficult. Ichigo, she whispered, keeping her eyes up and away from the two monsters before her. Ch5 putting up the mask. Her eyes somehow fluttered open the next morning. Rukia didn't even remember walking back to her home and crawling into bed. She just laid there dazed. Her body ached all over, and if it was possible she had even more bruises on her body than from the previous day. She glanced at the time to see it was only 9:30 in the morning. Grateful that she could make it to her division at a decent hour, she rose to her feet and changed. For a second she imagined the two men who called themselves Hiraku and Ryuto watching her and smirking, but she just didn't care. They had only done this to her twice now, but she already felt like she had been their SLV for eternity. Walking out of the mansion and making her way to the division, she found herself really struggling. Every 5 seconds a small flash would pass through her mind. Just seeing a man literally made her look away. She was quickly greeted by Sentaro and Kion, who were of course worried about her. Rukia coughed and waved at them. Oh no, I feel much better. She said softly. Rukia had a plan. It wasn't amazing or anything, but it would work for now. Everyone saw her faint yesterday and thought that she was sick. Colds could last for a good week or so, making it so that if Rukia looked weak or sad, she could blame it on the cold. If Ichigo were to come back by the end of the week or weekend, then she could tell him she didn't want him to get sick. Therefore, he would have to keep some fair distance from her and not see the bruises. But she knew she couldn't keep the sickness deal going forever, so she would have to think of something else. Maybe by then she could figure out a way to end everything, but right now she needed to work on being able to hide her emotions. Well, there isn't too much to do today. I think all you need to do is train the younger ones and then you are free to go. Rukia smiled brightly. You mean no paperwork? She asked. Kion smiled. Nope. None at all. The woman exclaimed. For a brief moment, Rukia forgot about all her worries and let the wonderful moment pass. But just as the moment came, it ended. Kurosaki fukutechu. A man yelled. More images of the previous night flashed across her mind and she winced. Kion looked at her worriedly but stepped aside as the messenger approached Rukia. A message from the captain. The man said. Rukia thanked him and he left. Rukia read the contents of the paper. Rukia. When the attacks on the humans were first done, we could sense strong Ryatsu around them, which is why we left to investigate, but now the Ryatsu is gone and we can't pick up any trace on it. If this continues then we will probably be back by Friday. I forgot to mention it but there's a load of paperwork in my office that I forgot to give you. Make sure to keep training the new Shinigami and give them the division lecture. Sincerely. Yukitake. She rolled her eyes at the part with the paperwork and threw the note in the trash. Of course, there is always paperwork somewhere. I shouldn't have gotten my hopes up. She whined. There was soon a spasm of pain in her legs and she almost fell over. She quickly grabbed onto a nearby bench and sat down, taking a deep breath. Out of nowhere depression consumed her mind. Why is this happening to me? Why won't they just go away? I don't deserve to be loved. She snapped out of her gaze and thought through the words that flowed through her mind. She was losing it and fast. I'm not feeling so well, I'll be back in a moment. She called out to Kion. Rukia rushed to her office and closed the door. She pulled herself under her desk and let out the tears that were threatening to spill just moments ago. Scooting her knees up to her chest, she wrapped her arms around her legs and let her head rest on her knees. The sobs that escaped her mouth were silent, and she was grateful for that. How could she deal with this? Everything was starting to sink in and she could feel it. Rukia knew she was feeling traumatized. Everything that happened to her kept replaying itself over and over in her mind. I can't even stop it. She whispered to herself. All Rukia wanted right now was to talk to somebody, to tell them how she felt, but she couldn't. I won't let Ichigo die. She fought with herself daily, saying that maybe if she told someone nothing would happen to Ichigo and that the two brothers were bluffing. But she had a horrible feeling that this was not the typical scenario. The abilities the two brothers had were strange, almost voodoo-like. By just looking and ripping up a card with a person on it, they could end that person's life. She had witnessed them doing so. They even inflicted an injury onto Ichigo's shoulder by simply making a small gash on the corner of the card. Rukia felt so lost and confused. Was she doing the right thing? Should she allow them to continue to take advantage of her? What other choice did she have? This had only happened to her twice and she could already feel herself falling apart. She finally rose from under the desk as the tears stopped falling. Glancing in a mirror to make sure her eyes weren't still puffy, she walked outside. Sorry about that, I needed to take some medicine. She said, lying. Kion nodded. Sure, no problem, well if you are ready they need to start training now. Rukia took a deep breath, and released it. Alright everyone, let's get started. Rukia said, trying to fight the images that wouldn't leave her alone. For the next 2 hours, the young Shinigami trained with one another, taking a lunch break in between. After lunch, Rukia decided to give them the big lecture. Okay everyone, I'm going to talk and you're going to listen. Rukia shouted out. All of the Shinigami sat down and waited for Rukia to speak. For some reason, there is a tradition where the vice captain gives this speech instead of the captain, so I really hope you take in everything I'm about to say. She paused and looked around at everyone. This is what is called the division lecture. You have all been here for several months now, and let me tell you, this division is very different from the others. Some of the Shinigami looked at one another and waited for her to continue. Out of all the other divisions, we are the most carefree and loving. This division holds a very special bond to one another. We're all brothers and sisters in a way. The captain told me that he feels the best way for us to be a good division is by being caring to one another, and I have seen for myself that this truly works. Now it can be hard sometimes because we go on missions and are separated from the ones we care for. Rukia stopped again, biting back her lip from letting the tears spill. If she cried in front of everyone, then they would definitely know something was wrong. But I've seen the other divisions, and not all, but a few lack something that is very important in a division: respect for others. In order to have a great division, not only should you respect those older than you, but also those that are younger and inexperienced. So I challenge you all, old and young, to get to know each other, to find common grounds with a person that you never really liked to begin with. If you can do that, then you will be fulfilling one of the captain's greatest desires. When the word desire flew out of Rukia's mouth, she froze. She quickly closed her eyes and tried to ignore the sounds and the pleasures from Hiraku and Ryu. Getting control of herself, she finished. I know it probably seems silly that we are telling this to you after several months of being here, but I wanted you to try to learn on your own and realize that respect and friendship is very important in this division. As you grow older and move on to other divisions, I want you to remember these words and try to pass on these words to those who are unfamiliar with it. That is all. Rukia said, smiling at the younger ones. They all clapped for her and she let them all leave early. Well said, Kurosaki Fukatechu. Sentaro exclaimed to her. Rukia smiled, not making eye contact with the man. Well, there's more paperwork to do, so I better get started. Kion looked worried about her again. Do you still feel sick? She asked. Yeah, it turns out I have a cold and it probably won't go away for the next week. But don't worry, I'll be fine. If only Rukia really had a mere cold. Kion grinned happily. I do hope you feel better, Kurosaki Fukatechu. Rukia grinned back. I hope so too. Luckily, the stack of paperwork hadn't been too large and Rukia finished it within 45 minutes. Feeling relieved that her work was done, Rukia arrived home at 6 in the evening. She knew that she should probably take a nap, but the thought of having another nightmare made her rethink her decision. So instead she decided to relax on her futon and allowed herself to think of Ichigo. When she thought of him, she could push the images out of her mind. Those horrible images of pain and disgust. The way their hands caressed her skin, the lust she could sense illuminating from their covered eyes. The grunts they made as they bound themselves to her. When Rukia realized she wasn't thinking about Ichigo and the instead two monsters, she cried again. Never in her entire life had she cried so much. Rukia had felt true pain before. Guilt and helplessness, pains of swords hitting her body, but never in her entire life had she felt such agony. They were practically controlling everything she did and said. She had to lie to people because of them, act fake in front of people in front of them. Rukia hated them. Every time she heard their voices, she felt her heart burn with pain. Her soul felt like fire. What was just recently beginning to frighten her was Ichigo. Sometimes when she thought about him, his appearance would change and he would be wearing a cloak like the other two. He would laugh at her hysterically and stare at her body, lusting for her. If Rukia could not depend on the one person she truly trusted, then how was she going to get through this? Ichigo was her one comforter, her lover, her everything, and now he was getting pulled into her illusions. Rukia was going insane. That day at the division had been terribly difficult on her. Giving that speech and seeing all of those people stare at her almost made her snap. Sooner or later, Rukia fell asleep and woke up later to go see them. Hachiru and Ryu. It was only going to be the third time. It was only the third time, like getting raped was supposed to be common or something. And sadly, she made her way to the spot where rather Hachiru or Ryu waited for her. She didn't say a word as she was carried to the room blindfolded so she wouldn't figure out how to get there. She stayed emotionless on the bed and only stared at the ceiling, trying to block out the motions of the two pigs. After they finished their business and said their snide comments, Rukia went home. The aching pains were now unbearable to deal with, but she managed to crawl into her room and sleep. Rukia was too tired to fight with the nightmares that played across her mind. Just a few more days and Ichigo will be home. Rukia whispered to herself. Even when she had nightmares about Ichigo, she still wanted him by her side. He was the only person in the world that could make her one. She really was starting to underestimate her strength. Would she be able to keep this from Ichigo? The question continued to haunt her mind. Ch6 if he only knew. For the first time in the past few days, Ichigo could feel the stress inside his body slipping away. I'm home. He whispered, stepping into his division. Hitsugaya, Yukitake and him couldn't find a clue to what had caused the deaths of those humans. They knew it had to be something other than a human because the Ryatsu that lurked around the bodies was strange and different. Look, if something else happens then we'll go investigate again. Yukitake had said to him. Ichigo just shrugged his shoulders. Why did they need him to look? There were 12 other captains, surely they could help out. He sighed, knowing that complaining about it wouldn't do any good. After I finish everything here I can finally see Rukia. He said to himself. Ichigo had seen the sadness in her eyes when he had left and Ichigo hated it. He hated when Rukia was upset about anything. Even when she would get something as small as a paper cut he would be filled with a bit of alarm. Rukia always joked around with him about how overprotective he could be, but it was true. And he didn't care. Protecting others was in his blood, especially those he cares for the most, and Rukia knew that. His thoughts came to an abrupt stop when someone was shouting his name. Kurosaki Taishu. A pest-like voice yelled. Ichigo closed his eyes in irritation and finally called back, not being able to handle the obnoxious boy. I'm here, Haru. Ichigo said flatly, keeping his eyes closed the whole time. Just looking at the kid could make Ichigo want to punch him. Glad to see that you are back, sir. The boy shouted. Ichigo rubbed the back of his neck, a bit annoyed that Haru was still shouting. You don't have to yell anymore. Ichigo muttered. Haru immediately bowed. I'm so sorry, sir. I really didn't mean to. Ichigo's scowl was now blazing on his face, but he didn't care. Did you just come to greet me or do you have some news about something? Oh yes, right. I have a message from Yamamoto, here you go. Hadn't Ichigo just explained that shouting was no longer needed? Rolling his eyes, Ichigo took the note out of Haru's hands. Thanks, how was the division while I was gone? Ichigo asked, not really caring too much, but of course Haru went into a long speech. Well sir, we got a lot done. First I helped train a few people and did some paperwork. Yuri and Senmo helped clean up a hollow. I had to attend a meeting for the vice captains. One of the oldest trees in our division was knocked down by a hollow that attacked. Oh, and someone threw up their lunch after training the other day and I had to clean. Ichigo clenched his hands into fists. Do you know how to communicate? I just asked how the division was, not what they did. Ichigo yelled. Haru looked fearful for his life. Oh sorry sir, well, it was good. Ichigo released the deep breath he had been holding in. Alright, that's all I needed to know. With that said, Haru bowed and quickly walked away, fearing his captain. Man, that kid can be so annoying sometimes. Ichigo mumbled while rubbing his head. He knew that even though Haru drove him nuts that he was still a very useful vice captain. Haru had potential to reach the top and Ichigo saw that when he had tested into 3rd division. He still had a few glitches but they were going away as time passed on. Oh Kurosaki Taishu. I forgot to tell you that there's some paperwork. Haru yelled from across the building. Ichigo only waved to confirm to Haru as he walked into his office. When Ichigo had first taken the job as captain, he felt really honored and knew he would commit to the job, but the second he walked into his new office and saw the stack of papers, Ichigo really wanted to quit. Doing jobs like filling out paperwork was not something Ichigo enjoyed or ever would. He remembered how Rukia had acted. Ichigo knew the whole time that she was hiding something. When they had walked into his office and she had seen his horrified face, she immediately started laughing. "Rukia," he whispered. If Ichigo wanted to see his wife soon, then he needed to finish the work of hell. The walk back to his estate was a long one. He wanted to get home quickly, but his body was tired from staring at so many papers. His hand even hurt from writing and signing his name so much. To his unluckiness, the work took much longer to do, and it was 8 o'clock at night. During one of his breaks he made his way to Rukia's division to at least get to greet her for a little while, but her captain explained that Rukia was sick. "She's sick?" Ichigo asked, the concern shining all over his face. "Yes, it seems she's been sick for several days and I allowed her to leave early," Yukitake explained. Ichigo really wanted to go home and check on her, but he knew he would never have the time. When he finally took the steps into his house, he could already sense that something was different. He looked around at all the paintings and decorations, trying to see what was bugging him. "Nope, there's nothing different, so what's bothering me?" he thought. "Ichigo." A voice called from above him. He looked up the stairs to see Rukia standing in the middle staring straight at him. He understood what was bothering him. It was the mood of his home. Something seemed darker about it, and Rukia somehow fit along with it. He decided to smile at her and wait for her reaction. But she didn't run to him like she usually did. She just stood there on steps, glancing down at him. When he went to speak, she started to move down the stairs slowly, avoiding eye contact with him. He only watched as she approached him. Instead of hugging him, she stood an annoying foot away. His head was starting to spin. Ichigo could read her like a book, and even these small differences in her were frightening him. "Rukia, what's wrong?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She coughed. "I'm sick," she stuttered out. "It's a cold. Sorry I don't seem so happy to see you. I really am glad to see you are home, but I just feel awful." Ichigo still didn't understand why she wasn't looking at him. But then, her eyes slowly but surely averted to his. There was a deep dullness in her eyes. "Does the light hurt?" he asked. She looked confused at first, but she grinned lightly. "Yes, this cold gives me weird headaches and the light only makes it worse." Well, that explained why she wasn't looking at him. Ichigo was several feet taller than her, so looking up would make her see the bright light. He scooted to her and slowly, not wanting to startle her for some reason. She seemed rather weak right now. Rukia allowed him to close the small space in between them. She wrapped her arms around his waist and crushed her head to his chest. He pulled her tightly against him and placed one hand on her back while the other rested on her head. She wanted to cry and tell him everything, but she had to lie. Ichigo seemed to believe her words, so she just followed what he said. "I missed ya," he whispered. Rukia only tightened her hold on his back, desperately fighting to hold the tears back. They both stood like that for a long time. This particular week away from each other had pulled at them, both of course having different reasons of why they missed one another. "Hey, am I interrupting something?" a familiar voice asked. Ichigo and Rukia pulled away from each other to see Renji standing there. "What are you doing here?" Ichigo asked, trying to aggravate his strange friend. Renji chuckled. "Just stopped by to see you two for a minute. I heard you just got back today," he said. Ichigo sighed. "The investigation was stupid. We didn't find anything to lead us to whatever killed those humans. But if another attack happens, then we have to leave immediately." Rukia tried to block out what he said. She knew what was happening, but couldn't say a word. "Ichigo, Renji, I think I'm going to head off to bed. If I want to go to the division tomorrow, then I better get to sleep early," she mumbled. Renji looked surprised and Ichigo just looked a little disappointed. "All right," Ichigo said softly. As she headed up the stairs, she heard Renji asking about why Rukia wanted to go to sleep so early. She quickly remembered that she could actually rest that night. That she wouldn't have to go to them. Even though the images rushed through her mind, she didn't mind as much. Ichigo is home. She whispered as she curled up into her blanket. Rukia fell asleep, and after what seemed like only several minutes, she heard a voice calling her name. Rukia? Ichigo asked. She turned to face him and smiled. What did Renji really want? She asked groggily. Ichigo smirked. He was missing a file and asked if I had it for some reason. He wanted to talk to you about something too. Rukia looked at him curiously. Did he say what? Ichigo shrugged his shoulders. No, he said he would come by and see you at your division tomorrow. He yawned loudly and stretched his arms out. Man, this mission has wiped me out for some reason, or maybe it's from the paperwork I did today. Rukia smiled faintly. She scooted over to let him lay down and tried her best to smile warmly at him. Ichigo took his top off and nuzzled close to her. After working his arm around Rukia, she turned to face him. I shouldn't be so close to you, Ichigo. I could get you sick. She whispered with her eyes closed. I think sleeping next to you won't do anything. She smiled. Not the fake one she put on display for her friends and subordinates, but a real and genuine one. What time is it anyways? She asked. It's about 10, I would have come to talk to you sooner, but Renji ended up staying much longer than I thought. This whole time she had been worried about Ichigo and what her reaction would be to seeing him. Just by glancing at other men she tensed up, so when she thought of Ichigo and how he would of course want to hug her and touch her, she was afraid she would push him away. But Rukia felt safer than never before in his arms, and she was so grateful for that. Ichigo was her everything. He placed a hand and ran it through her hair. You asleep? He asked. No. She whispered tiredly. There was once again silence, but Rukia didn't mind it. She didn't really feel like talking much anyways. I know you are sick or whatever, but can I get something from you? That question brought chills to her back. Get something. She took a deep breath and finally spoke. What is that? She asked. Ichigo slid his hand from her head to her chin. This, he whispered. Using his hand, he lifted her chin up just enough to reach his face. Ichigo kissed Rukia, not deeply or intensely, but just lightly. When he broke away from her, Rukia felt dazed. Ichigo, she whispered with her eyes still closed from their brief moment. Ichigo smiled at her and kissed her forehead. You really are a pain. He whispered. Ichigo expected Rukia to jab him or kick him, but he received no blows. Rukia had already rested her head back onto his chest. And was breathing heavily. She was already asleep. You really are tired, huh? He whispered again, letting his hands rest gently on her. And what felt like seconds later, Ichigo fell asleep along with her. Ichigo woke up the next morning to see Rukia already awake and dressed. How do you feel? He asked sleepily. She was looking for something around her room. Better. She replied quickly. Ichigo watched as she scrambled around their large room. Rukia felt his eyes on her and turned her head away even more. What are you looking for? She sighed. I need to give my captain something, but I can't find it. She said, irritated. Ichigo pulled himself out of bed and tried to help her. Found it. She said, scooping something and placing it in her pocket. Ichigo rolled his eyes, annoyed that he had gotten out of bed. You sure you're okay to go to work? I mean, I don't think I've ever seen you sick. Ichigo said, worried. Rukia chuckled. I know, it is sort of bizarre for me to get sick, but I'll be fine, it's just a cold. I can't miss too much work. The whole time Rukia spoke she fumbled with her fingers and avoided looking at Ichigo. He didn't seem to notice and pulled his shirt on. Well, I guess I better get going. I'm sure Haru is already freaking out about what to do. Ichigo grumbled. Rukia faked a smile and decided she would leave too. They walked out together and went their separate ways. Ichigo couldn't help but still wonder about Rukia's odd sickness. Never in his entire life of knowing Rukia had she gotten sick. Not even when she was in the human world with him. The day went by slowly and Ichigo kept pondering over his wife. Rukia really didn't seem excited to see me. He felt a little sad that Rukia hadn't grinned at him or kicked him or anything. She had seemed almost lifeless. Ichigo shrugged his shoulders. He thought her little, "I'm sick" story sounded a bit corny, but Yukitake had seemed convinced that she was sick and he knew her pretty well. Yukitake could be a kind person but he wouldn't just let someone as important as Rukia take the day off because she was feeling a little under the weather. But Rukia is stubborn. She wouldn't just leave because of feeling sick. Was she not telling Ichigo something? Should he worry about it? Rukia would tell me if something was bothering her, right? He thought. As Ichigo made his way home, he could sense someone up ahead lingering around for him. He looked ahead and saw that Ranjiku Matsumoto stood against a wall with her arms folded. "Ichigo!" She called out in a forceful tone. Her face was dead serious. "I need to talk to you about something." Ichigo, now standing much closer to her, only nodded. "What is it about?" he asked. She stayed in the same position and continued to glare at him. "Rukia." Ichigo didn't understand. "Why do you need to talk to me about Rukia?" She closed her eyes and pushed herself off the wall. "Follow me, Ichigo, this is very serious." Ichigo was now on full alert. Was something wrong with Rukia? Was she alright? They walked into a small room and she closed the door. Beside Matsumoto was Hitsugaya, who had the same serious expression as Matsumoto. "Ichigo," she began. He listened contently and there was a long dramatic pause. Matsumoto seemed to be struggling with the words. "What?" Ichigo asked, letting the irritation sink into his voice. She looked at her captain, who nodded for her to continue, and looked back at him. "I hate to ask you this, Ichigo, but I have no choice." There was once again a pause and Matsumoto found her voice. Have you been hitting Rukia?" Ch7 Unbelievable. Have you been hitting Rukia?" Matsumoto asked shakily. She didn't really know if the words had slipped out of her mouth or not, for she was shocked that she would ever need to ask Kurosaki Ichigo such a question. His eyes were wide and full of surprise. "Well, what did you just say?" he nearly whispered. Matsumoto looked away, not being able to bear the pain. "Ichigo, just say yes or no." Hitsugaya muttered, his height now bearing over Ichigo's. Ichigo finally snapped out of his gaze and answered. "Of course not. What the hell are you talking about anyways?" Another long silence followed, but Ichigo didn't say anything. He only waited, not sure if he wanted to know why they would suspect him of something so horrible. "Ichigo, well," Matsumoto began. "We had a vice-captain meeting this morning, and Hinamori tapped on Rukia's arm when she winced." Hitsuya pressed his hands tighter into his folded arms and kept his eyes downward as Matsumoto continued slowly. Hinamori saw Rukia's pained expression and realized something was wrong and pulled up Rukia's sleeve to see a horrible bruise crawling up her arm. She said that Rukia wouldn't look Hinamori in the eye and kept her hand over the part of her arm where Hinamori had just barely tapped it. Ichigo still didn't understand what she was getting at. Rukia paused for a long time and told her she fell and Hinamori asked her a question about you and if you had seen the bruise, and Rukia immediately started to cry. Ichigo was now very concerned. Hinamori pulled Rukia out of the room to ask her more about it, but she just kept repeating that she fell and that you had nothing to with it. "So look, we don't want to point any fingers, but we all know that Rukia wouldn't just cry over something like that." Hinamori also said that the bruise looked like it had been there for a while. "I know it's none of my business, but Rukia is a dear friend to me, so please, be honest and say you at least know what really happened to her bruised arm." Ichigo was at a loss of words, for Rukia had never mentioned anything about bruises. "No, I really didn't know. How early this morning?" he finally managed to ask. The meeting was at 9 o'clock. Matsumoto replied. Ichigo thought hard. They had left that morning from their house at around 8:50-ish. Even if Rukia had gotten hurt or something on the way to the meeting, there was no way the bruise would already have formed so badly onto her arm like you say Hinamori saw. Ichigo said. He started to head out the door. Where are you going? Matsumoto asked. He stopped for a second. Rukia is at home, so I'll go ask her about it. Ichigo began walking again, but Hitsugaya stood in front of him. Are you sure that is wise, Kurosaki? Hitsugaya asked, glaring at the other captain. Why wouldn't it be? Ichigo responded. Matsumoto now stood next to Hitsugaya. Hinamori said Rukia kept saying over and over that you have nothing to do with it. Well, with what? Getting the bruise or something else? It sounds like Rukia was acting a bit hysterical if you ask me. Ichigo flashed an angry look at Matsumoto. Why would she be acting hysterical? Rukia isn't the sort of person. Wouldn't Rukia have just told you about the bruises? Now, seeing as you just got home yesterday, I am assuming you hugged or at least touched Rukia and she didn't say anything. Hinamori just barely tapped Rukia's arm and she winced, so Rukia must be hiding something from you. Why would she hide something like that, Ichigo? Ichigo was once again dumbfounded. So you think that Rukia had the bruises possibly before I got home and she was just hiding them from me? Matsumoto nodded her head. Yes, that is a possibility. Hitsugaya spoke next. How has Rukia been acting around you at home? Is she normal? Ichigo thought for a second but quickly found his answer. She told me she was sick with a cold and that her captain let her leave a little early from her division, which would explain why she didn't want me around her too much. Matsumoto perked up at this. So she is hiding something. Ichigo still was sticking to the plan of going and asking Rukia about it and started heading out the door. Hitsugaya and Matsumoto both placed a hand on his chest. Listen, Ichigo, the only reason I found out about this was because Hinamori sent me a top-secret letter, which in this case meaning that I could only read what the contents said. So look, Hinamori thought this was important enough to make sure that I only received this information and to tell you what is going on. The only reason my captain knows is because he was there when I received the letter from her. We can't tell Rukia or say anything about this around her. She wouldn't just hide something serious like this from you for no reason. Especially if it caused her to cry, which Rukia never does. I know this is going to be hard for you, but you need to act normal and stay calm around her until we can figure out more about this. Ichigo was silent for a long time. Something was happening to Rukia and she wasn't saying anything to him. He knew that she didn't want him being overprotective of her, but if what Hinamori saw was true, then this was much more than serious. Rukia would never get so upset in front of others, not even in front of him. He also had the idea that whatever happened occurred while he was away. Alright, Ichigo muttered. I won't say anything to her about this. But seriously, we need to figure out what and fast. I don't know how much I will be able to take. The other two nodded. Don't say a word to anyone, Ichigo, not even someone like Rinji. Continue to observe Rukia and I'll do the same. I'll meet you here again tomorrow night. Matsumoto said. And with her last comment they left the deserted building and went their own ways. The walk home was a slow one. Ichigo was now extremely worried about his wife. What could have caused such a horrible bruise? Why had she started to cry at the mention of Ichigo? Rukia was not the sort of person to act out like that. He tried to think of something that would cause her to act like this, but nothing could form in his mind. Was someone hurting her? Did someone attack her while he was away and perhaps threaten her? But Rukia would surely tell Ichigo if that were the case. If Rukia got injured or hurt while at the division doing something, that was one thing, but to immediately start crying when asked about it? Ichigo shook his head and looked at the ground. He had received so much information in the past 10 minutes that he wasn't sure if it was all real. Matsumoto had only heard everything from Hinamori, so should he talk to her about it? Hinamori did send Matsumoto a very secretive letter though, so maybe not. Maybe Hinamori knew that Rukia didn't want anyone to know, though that was obvious. If Rukia couldn't tell Ichigo, her own husband, then who could she tell? She hadn't even really told Hinamori anything. The only reason Hinamori knew something was wrong was due to the way Rukia acted towards Hinamori's question. Finally reaching the front door, Ichigo slowly pushed it open. The house was strangely quiet and eerie, much like the first time he had returned to his home, only Rukia was not waiting at the top of the stairs. Wondering where Rukia was exactly, he crawled up the stairs, assuming she would be in her room. Sure enough, sitting on a chair across the large bedroom sat Rukia, looking to be writing something down. Ichigo didn't know what to do at first. He immediately wanted to bother her with questions but knew that he should listen to the advice Matsumoto and Hitsugaya had given him. Finally scratching his orange head, he sighed and spoke. "Rukia," he said a bit softly. She stopped what she was doing and slowly turned to look at him. Ichigo soon realized that Rukia looked extremely tired. "You okay?" he asked instinctively, hoping he didn't give something away. A cough soon escaped her mouth. "I still feel sick, this cold is getting on my nerves," she said irritably. Ichigo forced a smile out. "Well, why don't you sleep then?" he asked. She only shrugged her shoulders. "There's too much work to get done." If Matsumoto hadn't said anything to Ichigo, he might have believed everything she said. Rukia did after all never get ill, so how was he supposed to know how she would act to it? Even if something was happening to her, Rukia would toughen it out. Being stubborn was a key part of Rukia's personality, which for some unfathomable reason Ichigo loved about her. As she started writing again, which he saw as a note to her captain, he watched her every movement as he changed his clothing. Something he quickly noticed was how tense she appeared from behind. Her shoulders were hovering a bit higher than usual and her free hand looked to be shaking slightly. Ichigo tried to see if he could catch a glimpse of her arms to see the bruise, but her sleeves were too far down. Even before Matsumoto had said anything to him, he already suspected something. Now that his fears were true, he wasn't sure of how he would approach this to Rukia. Rukia sealed up the note to her captain and set it aside, but still stayed in her seat. Ichigo looked at her face, in her eyes, but he didn't want to get caught staring at her. Lucky for him, she started looking around for something, giving him the chance to look at her. Ichigo saw what he had never noticed before. It was one thing for her face to be paler than usual, but her eyes, they looked so dull. He knew that when people became ill, they always looked a bit dead, but Rukia's dullness looked to be somewhat different. Another unnatural cough escaped her mouth. She took a deep breath. "You really should go to sleep." "I'm fine," she snapped back. It was in that instant that Ichigo understood why Rukia's eyes had the strange dullness in them. She was afraid. But what would Rukia possibly be afraid of? The night went on in silence, and finally, an hour later, Rukia crawled into bed next to Ichigo, but didn't scoot close to him. An idea came into his head. Maybe once she falls asleep I can glance at the bruises, he thought. Hinamori had seen them on her arms, so maybe when she was deep enough asleep. Ichigo tried to move closer to Rukia, but instantly heard her deep breathing and understood that she was already asleep. If she isn't sick, then why is she so tired? When Ichigo first arrived home she had gone to bed early that night. If she had gotten into a fight of some sort then that could be the case. He remembered a long time ago how her body had been weakened due to her spirit being injured and not her physical body, making her tired easily all the time. Was this the case? Unfortunately, due to Rukia's sleeping position, Ichigo could not reach her arms without her possibly waking up. Ichigo sighed and fell asleep himself, where he had nightmares of Rukia pushing him away and rejecting him. The next day was the same. Rukia didn't say much to Ichigo and kept complaining about her stupid cold. Ichigo tried to say as much as he could to her, hoping that she would say more to him than she already was. It seemed strange to him. The first day that Ichigo came back, Rukia had acted pretty normally, besides the fake coughing and drowsiness, but now she barely looked at him and almost seemed to be avoiding him. Didn't Rukia realize that Ichigo knew something was wrong? It was really eating at him. He wanted to know, he needed to know. Ichigo had the nature of wanting to help others, so with the present situation, it was really messing him up. Nothing bothered him more than Rukia, his own wife, the one person he trusted the most, to be hiding something so large from him. He knew it had to be something big because her behaviors proved it. The little "I'm sick" act was getting old and fast. The more Rukia coughed and tried to look miserable, which she did, was already dying down. The day at his division was a long one. His vice captain gave him the wrong set of papers to do, causing him to do more paperwork, and all of the new Shinigami weren't paying attention as he trained them. "If you guys don't feel like listening to me, then you can just leave," Ichigo shouted. He knew he was never this harsh to them, but taking out his anger and frustration on all of their small little faces seemed to be pleasing at the moment. A few of the smaller girls watched everyone else to see what they would do, and after another moment of everyone staring at one another, they began to spar again. Ichigo sighed and watched as they continued to fight. When the day was done, he once again saw Matsumoto standing outside the same designated building like before. After getting a nod of approval from her, they stepped inside the room, but this time Hitsugeya was not with them. The captain was called to speak with Yamato Taishu. She said sharply before Ichigo could ask anything. "So," she began. "Did you notice anything?" she asked. Ichigo didn't understand what she meant at first, but then answered her question. "Rukia is definitely acting strangely," Ichigo said. He explained to Matsumoto how Rukia wouldn't look at him and always seemed shaky. "You said you think she is afraid of something?" Matsumoto asked, pondering over his words. "Yeah, it was sort of hard to see at first, but the more I watched her, the more obvious it became," Ichigo responded. Matsumoto didn't say anything for a long time. "I don't know what to do. If someone is hurting her." Another moment of silence passed through the abandoned room. Ichigo and Matsumoto whipped their heads up at the same time to see someone coming inside through the door. "Hitsugeya Taishu," Matsumoto said, surprised. He stood in the door looking a little out of breath with a small envelope in his hand. "Yamamoto Taishu wanted you to have this," he said, handing Ichigo the envelope. Ichigo already knew that this could only mean one thing. "There have been more attacks?" Ichigo asked, irritated. Hitsugeya stood in his usual folded arms stance. "It looks that way, and we have to go investigate." "When do we leave?" Ichigo asked. Hitsugeya paused for a long time. "Within the next hour." Ichigo's first response was to go, but then he remembered Rukia and how something might have happened to her while he was away. Would something happen to her again if he left? Hitsugeya seemed to know exactly what Ichigo was thinking. "Listen, Ichigo, there won't be anything you can say to Yamamoto Taishu to allow you to stay. I'm sorry. I realize that, but I don't want something to happen to Rukia," Ichigo muttered. Matsumoto finally spoke. "Well, what if I kept a close eye on her?" she asked. Ichigo turned his head to her. "How will you manage that? Your captain will be away too, making it busy." Matsumoto thought for a second or two and spoke again. "Maybe I could ask the Division of Technology for some help. Perhaps they could give me something." Hitsugeya shook his head. "That won't work, Matsumoto. They've got a lot to worry about right now with the illness of their captain." She started to look angry. "Well, I want to do something. We need to figure out what's going on." Ichigo was pretty surprised by how much Matsumoto wanted to help, and he was grateful for it. "Why don't you start by watching before and after you work? I doubt something would happen to her while she's at the division, too many guards around and whatnot," Hitsugeya said. He looked as bored as ever. Matsumoto slowly nodded her head. "It's not much, but it might help us find out something," Ichigo agreed. As soon as you find anything out I want you to tell me. He demanded. After they each left the building, Ichigo made his way home to tell his wife of his second departure in the past week. He had only been home a few days and he already had to go back to the human world. Once he entered his home, he saw Rukia lying asleep on a nearby couch. "That's bizarre, she never sleeps here," he whispered. She had been sleeping so much lately, what was going on? Then another thought hit him. Could Rukia be pregnant? He thought. Though that wouldn't describe the bruises, she was always tired and snappy. His thoughts soon disappeared as he remembered a law in Soul Society. No child can be born in Soul Society until after 10 years of marriage. He rolled his eyes. Out of all of the Soul Society rules, and there were a lot, that was by the far the strangest. It's the only way children can be born though. You have to be married, and for 10 years, otherwise it is impossible. Ichigo felt relieved that Rukia wasn't pregnant because he just wasn't ready for it yet. Even though they had been married for 7 years, it's really nothing compared to the length they will be in Soul Society. Of course Ichigo wanted to have children and Rukia did too, but they wanted to be ready and prepared for a baby. "Rukia," he said softly while pushing on her arm gently. When she didn't budge, he remembered what he wanted to see last night. "I can see the bruises now," he thought to himself. Slowly moving his arm closer to Rukia's, he gently started pulling her sleeve up. After pausing to make sure she didn't move, he continued. His eyes grew wide with shock. Right below Rukia's elbows were the deepest and darkest bruises he had ever seen. Anger immediately threatened to pour out, but he had to calm himself. Rukia couldn't know that he knew something was wrong. He still didn't know why it was such a big deal to keep it from her, but something in his gut told him to. After completely calming himself down, he woke Rukia up. Ichigo now had to explain to her the attacks. "Rukia," he said again. She opened her eyes to turn and look at him, but there was still fear and doubt in them. Deciding he wouldn't be able to look at Rukia while he said this, he averted his eyes to the ground. "What is it, Ichigo?" she asked. "I just received word from Yamamoto Taishu, there were some more attacks, and I have to leave in the next 30 minutes. When Rukia didn't say anything, he finally looked at her and regretted it. Her face was somehow even paler than before and her eyes were wide yet dull still. When she realized Ichigo staring at her, she shook her head and looked away. "I hope it isn't always like this," she whispered. Ichigo moved to the couch she was sitting on and looked at her confused. "First it was a week, and now it's only a few days, soon you'll never come back. You'll always be gone." Rukia had never sounded so depressed and Ichigo really considered blowing off his mission and staying. "I know, Rukia. I really don't want to go," Ichigo said softly, taking a hand and putting it in Rukia's. For a moment she looked about to say something, but dropped her head instead. "It's okay, I know you have to do it." Ichigo moved closer to her and gave her a hug. Rukia slowly relaxed under his grasp and reached her arms out around him. "Please come back soon and try to stay for more than a few days," Rukia whispered. Ichigo chuckled. "I'll try, K." She moved back just a bit to look at his face. "Ichigo," she whispered, and he began to kiss her. Then abruptly, there was a knock on their door. Ichigo pulled away from a breathless Rukia and went to retrieve it. A minute later, Ichigo returned with Renji and Hitsugaya. "It looks like we have to go now, I'm sorry," Ichigo said. Rukia slowly stood up and gave him one last hug and kiss, ignoring the two other men in the room. "Be careful," she whispered. "Love ya," he whispered back. With one last kiss he left again. The moment the door closed Ichigo knew something was wrong, but for the time being he had to ignore the pang in his stomach. "Please be safe, Rukia," he thought, giving his home one last look. Ch8 realization. "Where's Yukitake?" Ichigo asked as they made their way to the exit of Soul Society. "Renji's taking his spot," Hitsugaya said flatly. So Rukia is still sick or whatever? Renji asked. Ichigo nodded. In all the years I've known Rukia, she's only gotten ill once, and it wasn't too bad, just a cold like now. Ichigo perked up at this. Do you remember how she acted? He asked suspiciously. Renji looked confused by the question. Well, it was a long time ago, what do you mean by how she acted? Renji asked back. Ichigo rolled his eyes. You know, like was she drowsy all the time? Did she sleep a lot? Ichigo was now standing extremely close to Renji, making him rather uncomfortable. Back off Ichigo, I don't remember. Why are you harassing me anyways? Renji asked. Ichigo just sighed and stepped a few feet away, not saying another word. Don't worry so much about it Ichigo. Hitsugaya said loud enough for only Ichigo to hear. Matsumoto's got a close eye on her, and who knows, we could be making a big deal about nothing. Ichigo really hoped it was nothing, but he knew that sadly they did need to worry and that something was going on with Rukia. Once they passed through the portal, they sensed for where the attacks were coming from. We have to get there and quickly if we want to catch the offenders. Renji shouted. It's north, let's go. Hitsugaya said calmly and they all rushed to the area. Using Shuinpa to reach their designation faster, they saw police everywhere but no bodies. They're still inside the building, come on, let's go. Hitsugaya demanded and Ichigo and Renji followed him through a window. The bodies were all next to each other and appeared to have no physical damage done. So all of these men were killed in this building? Renji asked. That's what it looks like, but why would the attacker kill these people? Do they have something the attacker wants? Ichigo asked. All three of them began to search around the room and building, but they found nothing. We got here much faster than last time and we still can't find a single trace. Hitsugaya said frustrated. Renji stopped looking at the bodies and spoke. Well, what if the attacker killed from far away, like another place somehow? I've heard of that being possible. Renji said. That could be true, almost every time the killings happen the Ryatsu vanishes quite a bit by the time we reach the attacks, but that still doesn't solve how we are going to find out who did this. Hitsugaya said. It seems almost impossible. I mean we don't have any trace of any kind to lead to them. The only thing we can do next is try to find out who they might target next and hope that whenever the next person is attacked it will give us some sort of clue. Ichigo said. Renji and Hitsugaya nodded at this. Let's find out who these men were that were killed and see if they have any sort of relations to one another. Renji said. Since three of the men were killed, Renji, Ichigo and Hitsugaya took one each and searched their bodies. They found the wallets of the bodies that the police hadn't collected yet. Riko Himeno. He works at a bank as a teller and didn't have any other immediate family members. I don't see how he has any relation to the other two. Hitsugaya said as he continued to look over the parchments he found. Same here, this guy Tokisho doesn't have any peculiar evidence. Ichigo said. Well, what if we go and search their homes? Renji asked. An idea formed in Ichigo's head. What if they were trying to get attention for something? You know, to hide what they were really doing. Perhaps the attacker knew that we would investigate this in the hopes that they could get away with whatever it is they are really doing. Hitsugaya shook his head. That could be a possibility, but we still don't have any evidence. These men are all completely different, so there could be an endless possibility of what the attacker is really up to. Renji sighed. Then where do we go from here? I sort of liked Ichigo's idea about the attacker covering up something else that's happened. Why don't we start looking into that? But where do we begin? Hitsugaya asked. They were all silent as they thought. There was not a single clue to lead them to the next destination, so where should they start? They were so deep in thought that they didn't realize Matsumoto crawling through the window. Matsumoto. What are you doing here? Hitsugaya shouted. She looked straight at Ichigo and he immediately understood. What's wrong with Rukia? he asked. Hitsugaya closed his eyes and Renji just looked lost. Matsumoto couldn't speak as she handed him the piece of paper. Ichigo looked confused at first but saw the paper was a letter. "Read it," she stuttered. In a matter of seconds the room felt different, cold. Matsumoto only struggled to watch as Ichigo fought to keep reading the letter, and the further he read the more dangerous the room became. She could sense the anger illuminating from him. The letter slowly slid from Ichigo's trembling hands and onto the ground. "Ichigo," Matsumoto finally said softly, but Hitsugaya placed a hand on her shoulder telling her to stop. Renji, who was completely confused, didn't breathe out a word as he watched his friend struggle with himself. Seeing the questionable look on Hitsugaya's face, Matsumoto picked up the letter and handed it to Hitsugaya. Once he finished reading the paper he too felt anger. "Where did you get this, Matsumoto?" he hissed. "From a messenger, it's from Rukia herself." Nothing was making sense. "Ichigo, listen, we need to make a plan so we can stop what's going on," Matsumoto said softly, and she regretted it. For just one brief second Ichigo pierced through Matsumoto with his eyes. "Do they have her now?" Ichigo whispered out finally. His voice sounded rough as his hands tingled to grip his sword. "I don't know, Ichigo, but it's a possibility." And before Matsumoto could say anything else Ichigo dashed out the room. "I don't understand what's going on. Where is he going?" Renji said, looking annoyed. "She's been raped, Renji, not just once, but several times, and she couldn't tell anyone." Nobody needed to explain who the she was that they were referring to. Ignoring the shock on Renji's face from what Hitsugaya had just said, Matsumoto dashed out the door as well to see where Ichigo would go. No one's anger could compare to the dark feeling that swirled around Ichigo. He felt himself crumbling to pieces with each step he took. His breath shortened as adrenaline filled his blood. Nothing would process through his mind, only images that he never dared to think. Rukia, screaming, fighting for the men to stop, but they wouldn't, they kept going further and further. Ichigo's sword was now gripped in his hand, his Ryatsu was bouncing off the wall. If he didn't control himself soon, something, or better yet, someone would pull forward. And for once, Ichigo welcomed his darker side to come into the open, to murder the two men, torture them even. His wife, Rukia, the girl who saved him countless times, the person that made him complete, had been hurt, and possibly broken. How this could happen without his knowledge scared him more than anything, and she had hidden it, everything. It was only 8 o'clock at night when Ichigo left, so was she supposed to go and see them? As if hearing her question, a note fluttered out of nowhere into the room and onto the desk. Dreading every second as she walked to retrieve the note, she slowly picked it up. "Dear Rukia, it has come to our attention that your husband has left to the human world, so please meet us at the same place this evening at 10 o'clock. Love. You know who." Rukia tensed up and fast. She thought that everything had just been a huge nightmare. Ichigo had come home after 5 days and she thought that perhaps he wouldn't have to leave again, but to her unluckiness, just a few days afterwards he was already called back to look for clues of something he would never find. As 9:45 rolled around, Rukia began making her way to the place that haunted her in her sleep every night. She thought of the first day Ichigo had returned and how happy she felt. Ichigo was kind and warm to her and believed her little sick act. But as the days passed, it began to get hard for Rukia to be around Ichigo. The more she thought of what was happening, the more she wanted to spill. She avoided talking to him due to the fact that she might burst and tell him everything, but she would never allow it. Ichigo was going to live, and she would make sure of that. Her eyes cringed as she saw a man with a cloak covering his body. Rukia could already see his disgusting smirk from her distance. Silently, she walked into the room and waited for the man to tie her up. "It's been a while, hasn't it? We both really missed you," he whispered with sickness. Something inside Rukia felt different. She didn't know what it was, but something was telling her to not allow them to hurt her, to fight against them, but she ignored the feeling. Her body soon became limp. 2 arms caught her body and she shivered. Things are going to start getting a little different, he whispered. Rukia swore she could hear some hint of anger or annoyance, and she quickly started to worry. 10 minutes later, Rukia's blindfold was tossed onto the ground and she was shoved to the floor. The 2 men stood in front of her, both of their lips curved into a straight and serious line. She watched their every move, trying to see what they would do. You know, Rukia, you're pretty brave, one of them said. I mean really, you know, we've been watching your every move and you still try to somehow escape. But unfortunately, the other began. We aren't stupid, Rukia, and we know what you have done. Rukia only kept her stare at them and waited for them to continue. The first man picked up a letter which Rukia instantly recognized. You gave this to that girl Hinamori, didn't you? He asked, but Rukia only looked away. Well, you don't need to give us an answer, you are the only one who could possibly write it. The second said. I mean, who else could write a letter explaining in great detail what has been going on? The letter even has the time and dates that only you would know, and it's addressed from you. When Rukia realized this was the only letter they had found, she smiled. Now, lucky for you, the girl Hinamori never received the letter, but if she had, your husband would be gone. I can't believe it, Rukia, how could you be so careless of your husband's life? Don't you understand what would have happened if she had received this information? They sat on both sides of her. Rukia felt a pulsing close to her body, and averted her eyes forward. Her sword was sitting up against the opposite wall calling to her, but how could she move? You know what I find interesting, Rukia? One asked. You get very upset at the mention of your husband being killed, but what about the innocent people in the human world that have died? Don't you feel any guilt for that? Rukia looked down. This had never occurred to her before. You're being selfish in a way. By allowing your husband to live, you're letting those humans who have families die. Why do you want me to tell someone so badly? She hissed. Tears started trailing down her cheeks as more guilt consumed her. They both laughed. Oh dear Rukia, we're only toying with you. Unfortunately, we have decided to punish you for your attempt to admit what is going on to someone. They were acting very differently tonight and it was really bothering her. And how will you do that? I thought I was already being punished. She managed to mutter. They once again laughed. Oh Rukia, there is so much you don't understand. Rukia, we want you to do something for us after we have our business together. You see, we want you to deliver a message to someone for us. Rukia chuckled and it frightened her. A message? What sort of message? She asked. They both smirked and one of them pulled a closed envelope. It's simple really, once you've finished your business here, go and deliver the message, but make sure to hide yourself. Who is this message for? She asked and hoped she didn't sound as if she were giving in to what they wanted. Kuchiki Byakuya. Now this made entirely no sense. What did they want with her brother? What do you want with him? She asked angrily. They smiled. That's not what the point of this is, Rukia. It's for you to do and obey what we say or your husband could die. This was getting too far. I'm not going to deliver anything until I understand what Byakuya has to do with any of this. She said angrily. Their faces were serious. Ryu, pull her on the bed. Hiraku said. Rukia was chucked onto the soft sheets and they dangled over her dangerously. Maybe you just need some reminding to who we actually are. Ryu said. She only glared at him angrily. Ryu and Hiraku were pretty smart, but they failed to realize something extremely important, the second letter she had written that was signed for Matsumoto. Rukia knew that Hinamori would tell Matsumoto about her outburst with her bruises. She decided to write 2 letters, one being hidden under the first so as not to be seen. They hadn't mentioned Matsumoto at all, so that could only mean Matsumoto would hopefully receive the letter and get it to Ichigo. They were really foolish. Ichigo, she thought, hoping he would save her. Before Rukia could think of anything else, she felt two hot lips rip onto hers. Her eyes widened in disbelief and she tried with all her force to push him away. Why did this man kissing her make her feel so much worse than when they raped her? When the first man pulled away, she pleaded with them to stop but was only met by another pair of hot, disgusting lips. She was helpless again and she wanted to scream. We knew you wouldn't like this too much, so we decided to give it a go. You can never escape us, you are our SLV. One of them whispered as the other kissed her arms. No. She screamed but was cut off by more lips crashing onto hers roughly. It's your fault, Rukia, so just accept it. The other whispered in between kisses. They started to untie her clothing and she tried with all her might to move her body, but it wouldn't budge. She lifted her eyes to see if she could see the cards and sure enough they sat at the small desk at the side. If I can somehow reach those cards, then they can't hurt Ichigo or anyone else. As they continued to touch her, she tried to move her finger and to her luck, it wiggled slightly. She concentrated on her hands and ignored everything around her. Please, come on please. She thought to herself. But her finger wouldn't move again afterwards. The two had won again and now they wanted her doing other things for her. But why her brother? What did they want with him? In an instant, the two men stopped abruptly and stood over her. She watched as one of them grabbed the deck of cards. Hope that she had never felt before fluttered throughout her body as she recognized the person's Ryatsu. Don't move. The man called with the cards. He was so close to her. Ichigo, she whispered, but couldn't speak loudly for some reason. And there he was, standing in the doorway with his hand clenched tightly around his large sword. The room felt completely different. For just one brief moment, their eyes met, and she allowed every emotion to come to the surface. He saw it all, fear, pain, love, sacrifice, it was all shown on her face. Rukia felt an arm grip around her waist as she was pulled up. Get near her and I'll kill her. The second man said. She felt her sword pulse again but could do nothing. Rukia slowly turned her head in its direction. Let her go. A menacing voice called. Rukia was shocked to realize it was Ichigo's. The two men laughed. Do you really think it's that simple? I don't know how you found out what's going on, but it isn't going to end here. After looking at Rukia's body, Ichigo quickly looked away with an even more painful expression on his face. He couldn't stand to see that blank expression on her face and her clothes weren't covering her body well enough. A second later two people appeared next to Ichigo. Matsumoto and Hitsugaya. The two men laughed again. If you don't let her go, I'll kill you. Ichigo hissed. Well, obviously you want to kill us anyways. We have after all been screwing your wife for the past week. Ichigo's gripped his sword tighter as a blast of energy leaped from his body, shattering some glass nearby. But we couldn't help it, she's just so luscious. The man holding Rukia whispered as his arm traveled to her chest. Ichigo could no longer control himself and lunged for the man holding Rukia while Matsumoto charged towards the other. Rukia fell to the ground as Ichigo began to fight the man. His movements were sharp and aggressive. Her eyes widened when the man pulled out a sword of his own and started attacking Ichigo back. Matsumoto, get the cards. She screamed. Matsumoto punched the man's right arm and the cards flew out of his hands. Rukia tried to crawl to them but she couldn't move her body enough. Luckily for her, Hitsugaya grabbed them all right before the second man pulled out his sword. No. One of them hissed. Ichigo's sword had stabbed the man's arm. He ripped his sword from his body and they continued to fight. There was so much bloodlust in Ichigo's eyes. Go on then, kill us. One of them said. As the fight continued, the hoods covering the men's faces slowly slid off. The two men appeared to be young. One had light brown hair while the other had a deep black. They both had the same piercing green eyes. Ichigo didn't just want to kill them, he wanted to torture them. I really should kill you, but you deserve far worse than death. Ichigo screamed. The man he was fighting only grinned. Rukia felt hot tears pour down her cheeks as she watched her husband struggle with himself. Why did you do this to her? Why did you go to such lengths to get to her? He screamed at them. The two men only grinned. The other one fighting Matsumoto spoke. Why wouldn't we want Rukia? You married her, so you should understand. We watched you both for a long time and we decided that we should have Rukia the way you do, and it felt so good too. Ichigo screamed and stabbed his sword into the man's side, but they continued to fight. Hitsugaya, get Rukia out of here. Ichigo screamed as he fought the man off. He nodded and helped Rukia out of the room. No. I want to see Ichigo. She screamed, but Hitsugaya pulled her off the ground. In the 5 seconds that Ichigo dropped his guard, the man shoved Ichigo into the wall and placed his sword to his neck. I could kill you right now. The man hissed. Ichigo wasn't going to die, not until these two were good and dead. But I think it's time we get going. What do you say, brother? He asked. The other nodded as he struggled to keep Matsumoto off of him. Yes, we can finish this some other time. And in one flash the room filled with smoke and the sword holding Ichigo down was gone. This isn't the end. One screamed and they both vanished in a cloud of smoke. Ichigo's face was now more vicious than ever as he ran outside to somehow chase after them. Cowards. They think they can just get away. I'll chase those BSTRDS down. I'll torture them and kill them and make them wish they had never touched her. He screamed. Rukia watched him screaming and more tears poured down her cheeks. Nobody spoke a word as they heard the shallow breaths coming from Ichigo. Rukia couldn't even look at him. Ichigo, Matsumoto finally said softly. We'll keep a lookout for them, but for now why don't you go to Rukia? She said kindly. The words seemed to ease Ichigo and he nodded his head. When Ichigo turned around, his eyes landed on Rukia's. Hitsugaya and Matsumoto scooted back as Ichigo approached Rukia. He crouched next to her and lifted her dropped head. Rukia, Can you fix my clothing? I can't move very much. She whispered, cutting him off. Ichigo slowly pulled her sleeves back up her shoulders, but not before he noticed the horrible bruises all over. He wasn't done screaming yet, but at the moment he needed to be with his wife. His arms slowly and silently slid around her. I'll carry you, he said as softly and gently as possible. And with one swift motion he picked his wife up. Rukia could still see the anger blazing from him. Never in her entire life did she feel so safe. Ichigo knew everything and she didn't have to hide the secret anymore. Ch9 comfort her. Ichigo's grip on Rukia tightened as the faces of those monsters flashed through his mind. He glanced down at his small wife to see her looking out in the distance. She looked so broken and weak and it really tore him up inside. Let's get you to see Unohana, all right? Ichigo asked. Rukia barely nodded her head. Ichigo really didn't know how to feel about all of this. His wife had been taken against her will while he was gone and was threatened. If she didn't do as they said, then he could have possibly been killed. He felt a large amount of guilt for understanding that. Ichigo wouldn't be leaving on a mission for a long time, even if he was demoted from captain. The two men were still around and alive, and he would protect her until they were stopped, or killed. He kissed her head as they approached the clinic. Unohana was already up and waiting for them. Bring her in here, please, the woman said softly. Ichigo did as he was told and laid Rukia down onto one of the beds. Why can't you move, Rukia? She asked. They put some sort of binding curse on my body, Rukia said softly. Ichigo couldn't help but look at his weakened wife. Her clothes were still not on properly and the front of her kimono was pulled down almost to her stomach. Her hair was a complete mess and she looked more tired than ever. They're still out there somewhere, so we need to be on the lookout for them, Ichigo said. Hitsugaya nodded. A moment later two people emerged into the room. Rukia! Hinamori cried as she ran towards her bed. Hitsugaya stopped her. She'll be alright now, Hinamori. Hitsugaya whispered to her as his arm wrapped around her waist. The second person to emerge walked in calmly yet angrily. Kurosaki, what is the meaning of this? Kuchiki Byakuya demanded as he saw Rukia's weakened state. You don't know? Ichigo asked as he finally took his eyes off of Rukia. All I heard was Hinamori crying about Rukia, so I followed her. Byakuya stated coldly. The room was silent for a moment. Byakuya, you see, Rukia, well, she's been raped. Matsumoto stated as she saw that Ichigo couldn't say the words. Byakuya twitched with anger and looked back towards his sister. Can I have a word with you, Kurosaki? He hissed. Ichigo didn't want to be away from Rukia but followed him. Once they were outside, Byakuya nearly exploded on Ichigo. How could you let this happen? Don't you care about what happens to her? Byakuya nearly yelled. Ichigo was quite surprised by his voice. If you think that I would ever let something this horrible happen to her, then you've got it all wrong. Ichigo screamed. Don't go preaching at me about what has happened, because trust me, I feel pretty damn guilty about everything. You weren't there to witness the look of terror on her face. I almost killed them but they slipped right out of my grasp, but I'll get them. The last part was directed to no one but himself. Byakuya fell silent. I'll let this slide for now, but I want to talk about this more later. When the two walked back inside, it was obvious everyone had heard the entire argument. I need everyone to leave the room, please. Unohana advised. Why do we need to leave? Ichigo asked angrily. He was sick of people telling him what to do. I'm going to need to check her entire body, and I'm sure she would feel rather uncomfortable with a bunch of men in here, so please leave. Ichigo looked at Rukia to see her eyes averted downward. Without saying anything they all left. Hinamori and Matsumoto, Rukia would like you to stay. Rukia was afraid, but she wanted to at least be with some people she knew well. If it hadn't been for Hinamori and Matsumoto, then nobody would know and she would still be there getting tortured. She shut all thoughts out of her mind as Unohana helped her stand up. Can you move? Unohana asked. Not very much. Within an instant Unohana placed a hand on Rukia's shoulder and closed her eyes. A small green light formed around Rukia. Can you move now? Unohana asked. Rukia nodded her head. Alright, well, as soon as I look at the bruises, I'll heal your body, okay? She asked. Rukia only nodded again. Rukia removed her clothing and let Unohana look over whatever she needed. About 10 minutes later the men were called back into the room. I need to speak with you for a moment alone, Ichigo, please come with me. They made their way outside. Yes, what is it? He asked. Unohana looked a bit disturbed. Ichigo, I thought I should tell you this because you are her husband. Rukia has been raped, but it's much more than that. Now, lucky for her, nothing was physically damaged to a bad degree, but she is going to be sore for a while. Ichigo fought the urge to punch a nearby wall. Why does she have to go through all of this? He whispered angrily. Ichigo, I need to explain more of this to you. She may be able to heal physically, but mentally, it could take much longer. When a woman is raped, she usually becomes traumatized and unstable. Not only was Rukia raped several times, but she was forced to hide it from everyone. The stress she has undergone is very unhealthy. What are you getting at? Ichigo asked, still keeping his head down. For something so horrible like this to happen to her, she's taking it all very well and could possibly heal within the next year or longer. But, if Rukia seems afraid of you in any way, you must not be offended. Ichigo's hands clenched into fists. If she asks you to step away from her or even for you to leave the room, you need to just listen to what she says. Do you understand? She asked in a very serious tone. Yes, I understand. Will Rukia ever recover? he asked. Unohana looked away. It would look that way, but Rukia hasn't really had 1 second to sit down and breath. When she wasn't being tortured she was having to lie to everyone. All you can do now is be there for her. That's the one cure she can get from you, Ichigo. I know you love her very much and this is very hard on you too, so please, comfort her. Ichigo nodded and made his way back to Rukia. The only people speaking in the room were Matsumoto and Hinamori. Rukia had fallen asleep on the bed. You are free to go now, though I advise to keep Rukia with a large amount of people. Those 2 men are still on the loose after all. You can stay in my home. Byakuya said. Ichigo didn't feel like arguing with the man and nodded. Unohana looked at the other 2 girls. I think it would be best if you 2 stayed close to her. She might want a female to be around her. Is it alright if they stay too? She asked, looking at Byakuya. Byakuya nodded and they made their way out. Be careful, Toshiro. Hinamori said as she hugged the now taller man. He kissed her lightly on the lips and disappeared. Ichigo carefully picked Rukia up as to not wake her and they made their way to the Kachiki mansion. Once they entered through the front door, Byakuya gave them each rooms. You 2 can sleep in this room next to Rukia's. Ichigo, you can sleep in here. He pointed to the room on the other side. Sorry, but I'm going to be sleeping in the same room as my wife. Ichigo muttered. Byakuya glared at him and turned the other way. I want to talk to you more about this in the morning, Kurosaki. He said one last time and disappeared down the hallway. Rukia was still sound asleep in his arms. If you need anything, just call for us. Hinamori said kindly. He nodded at her and entered the bedroom. Even though all of her bruises were gone, she still looked injured and hurt. Ichigo almost wanted to wake her up so she could change, but decided that she should sleep. He placed her onto the futon and laid next to her. Ichigo kept a little distance so she wouldn't be frightened if she woke up. The mission and everything had been a setup just so Ichigo would get away from Rukia. The men killed innocent people just so they could get what they wanted. Even in her sleep she looked to be in pain. There were no words that could describe his hatred towards these 2 men. If he met them again, and he knew he wouldn't be able to control himself. They wouldn't escape. They had hurt his wife in such a horrible way. He now understood why she had cried when Hinamori had asked about her bruise that day when she had the meeting. It was because she couldn't tell anyone. Knowing that Rukia had to hide everything, and to protect him, only made him feel worse. Ichigo. Rukia whispered next to him. I'm here. He whispered back. She slowly sat up and looked at her surroundings. Where are we? She asked, confused. We're at your brother's house. Why don't you sleep now, okay? He asked softly. Rukia had no energy to respond as she slipped back into a deep sleep. And several hours after he drifted asleep, he felt Rukia moving next to him. Ichigo. She whispered softly. What is it, Rukia? He asked. Ichigo was relieved that she hadn't screamed to seeing him next to her. Ichigo, can we get something to eat? She asked. Ichigo was sort of confused by the question, for Rukia never asked for food at such an hour. Alright, I'll go get you something. As he started to stand up, Rukia pulled on his sleeve. I want to come. Ichigo didn't want to fight with her, so he let her come. I can carry you if you want. He whispered. She shook her head. I can walk, don't worry. But as Rukia stood and quickly winced in pain, Ichigo lifted her into his arms without saying a word. Rukia was too tired to protest and allowed him to carry her out of the room. Ichigo finally found the kitchen and set her on the counter since there was no table in sight. It was then that Ichigo realized he didn't know where any of the food was. Unlike the human world where things were pre-made, the word snack did not exist in Soul Society. As Ichigo scrambled around for food, Rukia kept her head down with her arms on both sides. Ichigo, she asked softly. Yeah, what is it? he asked as he continued to look around. Rukia lifted her head to look at him but dropped it again. You know everything now, don't you? Ichigo stopped what he was doing and turned to look at her. Yeah, Rukia, I know. After a long silence, Ichigo continued to look for food again, determined to get Rukia something to eat. And that's when he heard it, a soft but quiet sob. He turned around again to see Rukia's shoulders shaking violently when another sob escaped. In that instant his heart sank. Ichigo walked over slowly to Rukia. Ichigo, I'm so sorry. She choked out. He placed his hands on her shoulders gently. Rukia, you have nothing to be sorry about. This only caused Rukia to cry harder and Ichigo couldn't handle it. In all his life of know this girl he had never seen her looking so fragile. And without thinking he moved closer to her. Rukia placed her hands on his chest and cried more as Ichigo's hands fell around her back and head. Ichigo, she choked out. I'm right here and I'm not going anywhere. He whispered back. All of his anger subsided as he held his small wife in his arms. She pulled on his kimono as she sobbed more. Ichigo knew that the situation was just now beginning to sink into his chest and that his hatred would have to stay bottled up for now. Rukia needed him the most right now and he wouldn't leave until she wanted him to. I'll never let anyone else hurt you Rukia, I love you. He whispered into her ear as he ran his fingers down her hair. Rukia nodded at this. I'll love you. She whispered back. I wasn't going to risk them hurting you, not even if they were bluffing. He held her even tighter. You're amazing, you know that. He whispered to her smiling. Rukia had gone through all that pain for him. Even though he wished she hadn't, he felt so much love for her. They had blackmailed her and she could have given in at any time, but she didn't. We're going to get through this and I promise they won't ever get near you. I'll kill them if they do. It hurt so much Ichigo. She cried. And then night before you came, they kissed me and I tried my hardest to imagine it was you. Their lips had touched hers and it killed him inside to think about. He didn't want to imagine anymore. The fact that they raped her was already a deep stab. Rukia pulled her head back just enough to look at him. One of her hands came up and caressed his cheek. I was scared that I would be afraid of you, but I'm so glad I'm not. She said softly. Tears still fell down her cheeks but she was no longer sobbing. Ichigo rubbed her shoulder soothingly. I would never hurt you. He whispered to her. Rukia nodded willingly. I'm so glad you know everything. She said back to him with her head in his chest. A moment later she pulled her head back up to his face. Ichigo, kiss me. She said leaning her head closer. Rukia, I don't want to scare you. Ichigo whispered. Ichigo, why you won't? I promise. Her voice shook violently. Please, just let me know you're real. He paused for a long time but slowly brought his lips down onto hers so he wouldn't frighten her in any way. Rukia immediately and placed her hands on his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened slightly and Ichigo pushed Rukia a little closer. She still continued to cry even as he kissed her but they were tears of joy. Her husband was with her and loved her. Feeling his touch made everything better. After pulling himself from Rukia, she didn't seem hungry for food any longer. He carried her upstairs and into their small guest room. Ichigo kissed her once more as they lay down together. She continued to whisper his name and he smiled. The anger had completely subsided at the moment as he caressed his wife's face. Rukia enjoyed every minute of it. Even as thoughts of the two men came into her mind, she didn't care. She had Ichigo. You need to sleep now Rukia. He whispered kissing her forehead. She nodded and snuggled into his chest. I love ya. He whispered. I love you too. Rukia said back and kissed his chest. There would still be more problems in the future, but they didn't matter. Ichigo and Rukia had each other, and that was what they pondered on. When Rukia woke up the next morning, she felt someone lying next to her and smiled. Ichigo was there and he knew everything, everything. Ichigo ummed and looked to see Rukia smiling up at him. "Good morning, beautiful," he whispered groggily. She only continued to smile. He looked into her eyes and saw an emotion he truly missed. Happiness. The feeling was faint, but it was there. And so, he smiled back. "How do you feel?" he asked softly. "Okay, I guess." There was much more meaning to her answer. Rukia wasn't going to feel good for a long time, and he knew this. But he also knew that she was already attempting to heal. Him being so close to her was proof. She kissed his cheek lightly and sat up in her bed when she glanced down at the clothes she was wearing. The memories clouded her mind and she closed her eyes shut. "Rukia, what is it?" he asked alarmingly. I just need to change out of these clothes," she said, standing up. In fact, she wanted to wash her whole body. "I think I'll see if I can head to the hot springs nearby." Ichigo watched her carefully to make sure she could walk on her own. "Hinamori and Matsumoto are here, so see if they'll go with you," Ichigo said, slowly getting up himself. "I didn't know they were here too," Rukia said, surprised. "You were asleep when everything was discussed. They're just here to help out some." As soon as Rukia opened the door, her brother stood in the way. "Rukia, how are you feeling?" he asked flatly. She looked away and didn't say anything. Byakuya was a little too close. Ichigo sensed her alarm and was by her side in an instant. He moved past Rukia and exited the room. "You wanted to talk to me, right?" Ichigo asked. Byakuya glanced back at Rukia and nodded. As the two passed, Hinamori and Matsumoto were coming out of their room. "Hey Rukia," Hinamori said enthusiastically. Rukia smiled faintly. She really wanted Ichigo to stay with her. "Good morning," she replied. "How do you feel?" Matsumoto asked. "Better, I suppose," Rukia responded. "Look, you don't have to stay with me. I appreciate it, but I'm sure you have work to do," Rukia said, feeling uneasy. Hinamori and Matsumoto grinned. "Nah, don't worry about it. We both talked to our captains and they're fine with it." Rukia looked at Hinamori. "Unless you want us to leave, Rukia. We totally understand," Hinamori finished. Rukia shook her head. "No, I'm glad you two want to help out." Rukia paused. "So Renji knows now?" Rukia asked quietly. Hinamori nodded. "Yeah, but he's the only other person besides everyone who was there last night. He's a close friend to me, so it's fine. But really, I don't want this to get out, okay?" she asked. The other two nodded. "I wanted to go to the hot springs today if you wanted to join me." It seemed rather soon for Rukia to be going somewhere like a hot spring, but they agreed nonetheless. "Yeah, that sounds really relaxing," Matsumoto said overdramatically. "Sure." Hinamori beamed. Matsumoto and Hinamori were going to have to be extremely careful around Rukia. As they changed and got ready to leave, Byakuya and Ichigo were in one of his personal studies room. "Have a seat," Byakuya demanded. Ichigo sat and waited for Byakuya to say more. "I want to apologize for my outburst last night because I know you would never allow something like that to just happen, but can you please explain the entire situation to me? I do not know much." Ichigo was surprised. Byakuya was always one of the first people to know just about anything. "Yeah, sure, but it's not going to be easy for me to explain," Ichigo mumbled. Even before Ichigo said a word, he could feel the anger and hatred building up inside. "After I left for my first mission, Rukia was kidnapped that night. Two men threatened her, saying that if she didn't do as they asked that they would kill me. After proving to her that it was possible, she had no choice but to do as they wanted. Ichigo didn't need to say what it was they wanted by the look on Byakuya's face. "Please continue," he said. "They also told her not to tell anyone due to the fact that they could kill me, so she didn't tell a single person for the next week and every night while I was gone they." Ichigo couldn't finish the sentence once again but Byakuya understood. "I immediately knew something was wrong and Matsumoto knew something wasn't right either." She soon received a letter from Rukia explaining the situation. It also turned out that the two men could watch Rukia and see what she was doing, so Rukia didn't try anything funny and tell someone. But, somehow Matsumoto found out without them knowing and we went and saved her. A long silence followed. The previous night was now fresh on Ichigo's mind and he wanted nothing more than to hunt the men down. "Oh, and another thing," Ichigo began. "You need to be careful around Rukia. She might be sort of afraid of men for a long time, so you need to keep a good distance from her and watch what you say. Rukia seems okay around me, but I could already tell this morning that you were too close to her. It's nothing personal, she's just gone through something horrible." Byakuya nodded in agreement. He too felt great anger towards these two horrible men. "Do you have any idea of what their names were?" Byakuya asked. Ichigo thought for a minute. "Well, in the letter that Rukia gave Matsumoto, there was a mention of the names, I think they were Ryo and Hiraki, or Hiraku." Byakuya's eyes widened momentarily. "Did you see what they looked like?" he asked in a more interested tone. "They looked pretty much alike except for their hair color. One had light hair while the other had dark." "That is very interesting," Byakuya murmured. Ichigo looked at him curiously. "Interesting?" Ichigo asked. "Those names sound vaguely familiar, but I can't remember from where or when," he said quietly to himself. "Well, you can leave now if you want," Byakuya said, shooing Ichigo out of the room.